Trusted, credible, nonpartisan. The Hill's unbiased news and analysis on policy and politics is delivered straight to the halls of Congress with unparalleled engagement in the Beltway and beyond. As we enter mid-year and midterms, the U.S. economy is projected to be at a critical inflection point as we focus on policies and themes impacting Wall Street, K Street, and Main Street. From enterprise reporting to breaking news to live events, The Hill stays on the pulse of what's next. Welcome to The Hill's Invest in America Summit.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Bill Salmon. I work at The Hill. I'm so delighted that you joined us here for this really important program. We're calling it The Hill's second annual Invest in America Summit. It's also a really timely program because today we are exactly 6 months from the midterm elections. And what is the biggest issue in the elections, as usual? Well, it's the economy. And any honest assessment of the American economy essentially boils down to just two words. And those two words are, it's complicated, right? On the one hand, you've got high gas prices, you've got high food prices, you've got inflation, you've got things like debt deficit, you've got tariffs. But on the other hand, you have some fundamentals that are underpinning the very resilient overall American economy. You look at things like the stock market keeps continuing to set record highs, consumer spending is up, job growth is up the last couple of months. And if you look at the broadest economic indicator, of course, the GDP, it's expanding, which is better than the alternative, which is contracting. In fact, the latest numbers show that the GDP, the economy, is growing at an annualized rate of about 2%. Right. So, and by the way, amid all of these, economic cross currents, we have an awful lot of American companies spending an awful lot of money on capital expenditures on artificial intelligence. So, like I said, the American economy is complicated. Fortunately, today we're going to try to uncomplicate some of that through our program in which we're going to dig into a lot of the policies and, yes, sometimes the politics that impact Wall Street, K Street, most importantly, of course, Main Street. And hopefully by the end of the program, we will have made some progress in better understanding what it'll take to more successfully invest in America. Before we do that, I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Tokyo Electron, for their very generous support in making today's program possible. I also want to invite everybody in the room and everybody watching us online on the Hill.com's live stream to join in and participate in the conversation, follow the conversation on social media using the hashtag #TheHillEconomy. That's hashtag #TheHillEconomy. And now I'd like to get this program started by introducing a couple of very special people. The first is veteran business journalist Betty Liu, who is not only an author and a board member, but she's also a former Bloomberg TV anchor and most recently an executive vice chair of the New York Stock Exchange. She's going to be interviewing as our first guest someone who, by the way, has published an interesting op-ed on the economy in today's edition of The Hill. You can read it at thehill.com. But we're very happy to be joined by White House Senior Counselor for Trade and Manufacturing, Mr. Peter Navarro. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Betty Liu and Peter Navarro.
Hello. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bill, and thank you to The Hill for inviting me to be with such great guests like Peter Navarro and others. So it's going to be a great program for the rest of this morning. So, Peter, let's get right into it, because Bill had mentioned that you wrote an op-ed yesterday about inflation, and it's no surprise for everyone here. Inflation is trending higher. It's now at a 3-year peak. Some are calling it the Trump inflation. You wrote the op-ed yesterday and you said that's wrong. It should be, really people should be looking at it as the Iran terror. inflation.
That's absolutely correct, yes.
And tell me a little bit about why you felt you wanted to write this piece, and what is the message you want to send to the public?
Well, the message I want to send squarely to the Federal Reserve is don't even think about raising interest rates now into the teeth of what's a supply shock, an oil price shock. And I think what's interesting to me, if you look at the economy, let's level set here is like what's going on. You've got the two things the Fed watches is the employment and the inflation. And on the jobs, the GDP front, and all of that, things are looking beautiful because of two things: the Trump tariff wall and the big beautiful bill aspects, which have basically encouraged onshoring through the 100% expensing and other provisions. And so, for example, this week we saw one of my favorite indicators going back 30 years, which is the ISM Manufacturing Index. Mm-hmm. It's a diffusion index, 0 to 100. If it's over 50, we're expanding. If it's under, we're in recession. So what's been happening, if you go back to 22 under Biden, that thing started to go underwater for a very long time. And our manufacturing was, along comes the Trump tariff wall, which basically encourages investment here, and then the big beautiful bill. And what we're seeing now is 5 straight months of manufacturing improving, and that thing got up to 54, which is a very robust number.
So above the line.
Above the line.
Yeah.
So if you think about where GDP's going, where the unemployment rate's going and all of that, that's very healthy because of the policies on trade and tax policy, regulatory policy, and the things that we've done. Now, the other one that you watch at the Fed is inflation. And obviously, things are not pleasant at the pump. We're seeing the core move up in ways. Mm-hmm. But
prices are going up.
But this is exactly because of the Iran terror inflation. And for me, it's really important to be a student of history on this. If I told you that we were in a period of time where Iran wanted to develop nuclear weapons, the Iranian leaders were saying we want to wipe Israel off the map, that their IRGC was going in boats and basically interdicting ships and holding, say, 18 British sailors hostage. I say, what year was that? And you'd say, well, of course, it's this year. Well, that's actually 2006, okay? 2006. That scenario unfolded. It helped contribute to a significant oil price shock at the time. And Ben Bernanke was chair of the Fed, and he understood that demand pull inflation is very different from supply shock inflation, made the decision not to raise rates, and a year later would begin cutting rates, because that's what you do. But we have a Federal Reserve here right now, which is beating the rate hike drum beats, and it would be the worst possible thing. Now, the other thing about 96, which is different, is we had a president in Bill Clinton who, instead of confronting Iran and dealing with that issue then, he did what every president after Ronald Reagan and before Donald Trump did, which is to ignore the problem.
Well,
okay?
so Peter, so what you're saying is this has been happening for decades. We're finally confronting Iran, in your view, the way that it should be. And so this is kind of the price to pay, but it's temporary.
Yes, and here's the thing. I've got a pretty good memory, right? And so when I come and have conversation with you, I like to share details. And it exceeded my bandwidth to remember all of the ways that Iran has killed Americans since the beginning of the embassy crisis in the 70s. I mean, it's been carnage. I mean, you had the Beirut incident in '83, which was the worst death for U.S. Marines. In 96, the Cobalt Towers incident in Jordan had killed some more of this. You go to the Iraq War. I mean, I hope you know this. Soleimani invented these explosive forming penetrators that were a revolution in asymmetric weapons, and they were able to cut through our armored vehicles. And it's very personal to me because I remember during the first term going up to Walter Reed and seeing men without arms or legs or sometimes all of that. And that was all Iran. And then, 2020, they bombed a couple of our air bases, and we got like a couple of hundred American soldiers now who have brain damage. It just goes on and on and on. So the question is, why, not why did President Trump do what he's doing now, but why didn't somebody do that before that? Because I mean, look, it's like, what have we seen? It's like, if somebody's got a knife and they go around and they stab everybody in the neighborhood, right? Do you give them a gun? Do you give them a nuclear weapon? Iran reminds me of these crazies they keep letting out of New York City jails on no bail, who are stabbing people and raping people and doing all that. And then they hurt somebody else and people are, oh, wow, well, surprise. So bottom line is that inflation, people need to understand, that's Iran terror inflation. The Democrats and a lot of the legacy media are going to have amnesia about the dangers of Iran. They're going to try to blame Trump going into the election for the inflation. But I think it's important to understand exactly what's going on here, what the stakes are, and make your decision within the context of history and the broader danger. Because if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, if they maintain the ability and improve their ability to send ballistic missiles our way, they will kill us. They will kill us. That will happen unless we let them do exactly what they want in the Middle East. So that's what this is about.
And I understand that, and I don't think anybody in this room would want that to happen, and it would be a nightmare.
Yeah, but down the road at Capitol Hill, the Democrats don't give a crap about that, at least in their rhetoric. They just as soon, like, they're going to go at us relentlessly on the inflation. And I'm just telling you, it's like everything we do policy-wise has been bringing all of that down. This is a pure supply shock. It's happening because Iran is basically destabilizing the Strait of Hormuz.
So let me ask you, because I think there is this world where you can agree on tackling Iran and at the same time want to help Americans with the consequences of that, which is inflation.
Yes.
So there is a world we can agree on that.
And yes, I totally agree on that.
And so, however, you're sending a warning shot to the Fed. Don't raise rates because of this, because this is not a permanent. This is sort of masked. This inflation is masked. Is masking what's truly happening with the global economy. So
the other historical marker is Greenspan faced the same thing because of Middle East conflict.
Yeah.
And he didn't raise rates, he cut them. Okay, so we got two of the better chairmen. Like there's no perfect chair, but those are two of the better.
Well,
and they
that's a good
cut
lead-in.
or held rates, okay?
So Peter, that's a good lead into my question here on the chair.
Yes.
Because I know you have not been a fan of Powell, who has left.
He's a Fed chair, he's an idiot. Do I repeat myself?
You've called him a
Channeling
few.
Mark Twain. No, he's really the worst one we've had.
Kevin
the
Warsh,
history's there.
but let's look forward.
Go ahead.
Kevin Warsh.
Yep.
Okay. So in your view, how much confidence do you have in Kevin Warsh to lead the Fed in the way that you think? Obviously, the Fed is independent, but what's your confidence level in Kevin Warsh?
Obviously, the Fed is independent. So that was the problem with Powell. The Fed was not independent under Jay Powell. Basically, he sucked up to the Biden administration to get reappointed, and the price of that for the American people was that he did not raise rates when he should have, when the Biden inflation was kicking in. He said it was transitory, it took hold, and it got out of control, and we had to deal with that. He made 3 major blunders. He raised rates too quickly in the first term for Trump. He was criticized by the Fed for doing that. That cost us jobs. He raised rates didn't raise them fast enough
Too late.
for Biden, right? And then this time around, he could have cut them faster, but he didn't. So the problem here is political. It's like the Fed's a political body. Don't fool yourself. That's not like a bunch of high priests who make decisions based on what's good for you. Okay, forget about that. You've got a 4 out of 7 majority right now, who 3 of them were appointed by Biden and Powell. That makes a block. They're all talking Fed rate hikes now. And I don't see a lot of depth there. I mean, traditionally the Fed had really smart people on it. I mean, Bernanke, Greenspan, these are like PhDs from Ivy League places, right? Powell doesn't even have an economics degree. And then Lisa, I mean, come on. It's like these people are not playing with a full economic deck, and they're playing with our economy. So I'm just trying to say, hey, just go back and study your history books there. The danger is the Powell shadow chair. You asked me whether Kevin Warsh is going to be effective. It's like not if...
Or what's your confidence in him?
Well, Powell should be off. Like, again, history. Remember, it's like no Fed chair stayed on the board after they left the chair, okay? Dating back, I don't know, I think it was like the 80s or something. It's like way back in time. And the guy who did stay was actually pretty good, and everybody wanted him there. Nobody wants Powell there, at least in this administration. So they've got a problem. Yeah, so it's a political problem.
So are you saying that you do have confidence in Warsh, but you think he's going to be boxed in by people like Powell?
That is the danger, okay? And we have to recognize that. We have to talk about it. We have to get it out there, have the debate, and have this debate. I mean, if the Fed starts talking rate hike, we have to have this discussion. It's like insane to raise rates into a supply shock. You just don't do that. The difference between a demand shock causing inflation is when you have a demand shock, growth is going this way, right? Inflation is going up, and you gotta control one, you control the other, okay? But with a supply shock, what you get, it's like it's a stagflation scenario, because it not only causes inflation, it causes recession, right? And so if you add a rate hike, tight money policy contraction shock to a supply shock, you virtually guarantee
it's going to
recession.
Exacerbate that.
Yes.
Yeah. So Peter, just in the last few minutes, let's quickly talk tariffs, because we haven't gotten to
Love to talk tariffs.
We haven't gotten to that part.
Well, the person who loves tariffs more than me is Donald Trump, because they work. Go ahead.
Well, so let's talk about that. Tariffs, you know, you've mentioned the tariff wall and how that is helping manufacturing.
Yes.
You know, there's data on different sides saying that the tariff revenue is falling short. I know we're going to have somebody from...
what does that mean? What does that mean, falling short?
That the revenue collected from the new tariffs have fallen short of prediction.
Okay, so...
Well, you had predicted $700 billion a year.
Oh, well,
and I think...
we had a little problem with called the Supreme Court, but so that's kind of cut things down a little bit. But you're going to see over time, because we were prepared for that scenario, the USTR, Jamison Greer, United States Trade Rep, has been doing what's called Section 301 studies to crack down on the countries that cheat us. So that's going to start kicking in. Howard Lutnick, right down the street here, doing a great job as Commerce Secretary, doing 232s, which is traditionally steel, aluminum, copper. Now we're doing critical minerals and all that kind of stuff. So the best thing, we go back to what we talked about earlier, which is that the ISM Manufacturing Index is going straight up because investments coming in to this country into manufacturing. So,
But one would argue, though, that the different tariffs that have been implemented,
Yeah.
and I understand that, that the Supreme Court had put a stop to the tariffs under the IEEPA. However, you have a room full of business leaders and others who...
we're in the trade center here.
Exactly. That's right.
Yes.
Good call.
Yes.
Who like stability. And tariffs have changed, I think, something like 50 times, according to the Tax Foundation. So what do you say to this room of leaders who, if they're going to allocate capital, want stability, and yet the tariff rates keep changing and it's unpredictable? What do you say to give them confidence?
So first of all, the tariff rates might change, but the tariff policy does not. We know that Donald Trump is going to do the best he can to protect our manufacturing base, our defense industrial base, American workers, with the goal of prosperity and security. We know that. So why the tariff rates, why are they changing? Well, one of the reasons why they're changing is because the tariffs we impose basically empower folks like Jamison Greer at USTR to go out and make deals with countries to unilaterally lower rates. I mean, the news today, the EU just voted to lower some tariffs on some key products, American products, in completion of the deal we struck with the EU. So if tariff levels are moving around a bit, that shouldn't worry people. The certainty is in the fact that companies here, workers here, will be protected from unfair trade. I mean, I start from the proposition that is just hard fact that our tariffs historically have been significantly lower than every other country in the world because of the way the World Trade Organization structured a clause called most favored nation. Look it up. I'm not wrong there. So how can we live in a world of free trade where they get to cheat by the rules? Donald Trump says that doesn't work for America.
So for you, it's payback and it's right-sizing.
Payback, it's balancing.
Or right-sizing the tariff policy, essentially.
All we want to do is balance our trade. Okay, when the day that our trade deficit goes to zero is the day I'll be happy with no tariffs. But tariffs look, they're an important part of our history. I don't know if you know this, but you go back to Hamilton, you go to Henry Clay, you go to Abe Lincoln, you go to William McKinley. They all believed correctly that tariffs were the secret sauce of a strong manufacturing and defense industrial base, and a way to raise revenues, which was better than a lot of the taxes folks are imposing. So this has been a lot of fun.
All right, Peter, yes.
I appreciate it.
You're a
and
pro.
I like the Hill. I love the Hill.
You know
It's
when
like
things are ending.
The Hill does a great job getting stuff out there, so support that. It's like, the op-ed page is very fair and even. They hear all points of view, and thanks a lot.
Well, excellent. All right, Peter, great to be with you. Yes,
Okay.
and you can just
All right.
from there.
All right.
All right, now for the other perspective, the Democratic perspective, and a peek inside the manufacturing-rich state of Michigan. Please welcome the ranking member of the Research and Technology Committee, Congresswoman Haley Stevens, to the stage. Congresswoman. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. So I don't know if you got a chance to hear Peter's comments about the tariff wall and improving manufacturing for the last several months. What is your take on this? I mean, you represent so many manufacturers, particularly the auto industry in Michigan.
Yeah, I am a manufacturing evangelist on behalf of Michigan and our not only robust automotive supply chain, but also defense and aerospace. This is really the envy of the world. In my congressional district in Oakland County, Michigan, the I-75 corridor is this incredible concentration of innovation, small to mid-sized manufacturers who need one thing, and that is certainty. And they also want to compete on the global playing field, and they want to do so with trade rules that are followed and abided by. Look, at the quarter-century mark, and we recognize that China has not been playing by the same rules, and it is certainly time to get aggressive. But I think back to last year, and look, new administration coming in, big, ticket items that they're trying to put forward, but 55 tariff announcements in 100 days was head spinning. And what we've seen as a result in the place that I call home is a pullback on investment. Some of this was also matched with a tax bill that rolled back some of the investments in new innovations. And there's some job loss. Instead of taking on China, we've started a trade war with Canada, and Michiganders are paying the price, right? Our small businesses are paying the price. So I remember in my freshman term in Congress, I am a Democrat who flipped a long-held Republican seat. I did so by talking about manufacturing. I've done tremendous bipartisan work in the manufacturing and industrial policy space. I've had my bills signed by both presidents I've served under, or as a member of Congress during their administration. And, I remember, reaching out to Mr. Lighthizer, Bob Lighthizer in particular, on those first stage tariffs and saying, hey, can we get an exemption here? Can we do this? And there was an open and direct line of communication. And there was a healthy mode in some respects. Right now, we have been flooded. And I just have to say, we shouldn't be licking the bootstraps of China starting a trade war with Canada. We've got, a second international crossing that is 20 years in the making at the Detroit River with the bridge, Gordie Howe Bridge. For some unknown reason, the Canadians paid for this bridge, but for some unknown reason, the president doesn't want to open this bridge. I mean, that alone is a national security risk, right? We can't just have one bridge, but it's a slap in the face to what we call in Michigan the downriver community. I got 1,000 people with Cleveland Cliffs out of work right now, 1,000 workers. And then I'm hearing we're doing foreign steel in the ballroom. Oh my gosh, this isn't working. I want to cut deals for Michigan, not all these other countries. I need investment coming into my state now with a functional tax code and trade certainty.
So in your view, what's most effective? Is it not broad-based tariffs, but narrower tariffs? Is it border protection? What, in your view, is most effective?
Well, the way in which I am proposing that we move right now is through a piece of legislation that I authored and introduced last year called the No Chinese Cars Act. That would be 100% tariffs administered by the trade rep for Chinese vehicles, because we all know what they do. They fully subsidize, they dump into markets in various industry sectors, they belie costs, and our industries pay the price. I mean, look at this with drones, 3D printers, solar, and on. I will be damned to see this happen to the auto industry. So I think that's a good place to go. You've also seen, Section 301 stay in place. The other thing that we want to look at is the certainty with the North American trade. We want to be competing as a continent, globally. And so making Canada, our trade enemy in some respects. Look, I got small businesses in the northern part of my state, the Upper Peninsula. They're down 40% just because the Canadians aren't coming over. And look, even the auto workers are saying, we've got union members over here. Some of these are American companies. And, we've been kind of dealing with some head spinning on that front. And then seeing Canada cut a trade deal with China.
Yeah.
Aye.
Okay, so let's pivot a little bit. So I know you mentioned the Chinese Cars Act, but you're also sponsoring other pieces of legislation.
Yeah, I'm working with Senator Slotkin.
Right.
We've introduced, Protecting America from Chinese Cars Act. Look, folks, we need to get aggressive. The bill I'm doing with Slotkin is we do not want to let any Chinese car over our border, even for a day trip from Canada. Why? national security, that technology that's in those cars, the espionage, the, mapping of our land, our territories, ag, we can't allow that to happen, military bases and on. And then plus, we just want to be aggressive in terms of protecting ourselves economically. So, this is going to be a multi-pronged approach, and I'm also, delighted to have done bipartisan work over a number of years on the strategic committee on select competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned, when you talk about Chinese cars coming in, and that's a national security issue. It's not just obviously narrowed down to Chinese cars, but there's a lot of discussion about Chinese LLMs. And there's recent reports on just how expensive AI is now becoming, the compute costs. And companies are now, or even startups or smaller developers are turning to Chinese AI companies and Chinese LLMs. And I'm curious, being that you're on the the Research and Technology Subcommittee, what is your view on the national security risks that are being posed by Chinese AI companies, and potentially some of those loopholes as people start looking at the real costs of AI?
Yeah, and look, this is a Michigan moment and a Michigan call to action in many respects, because the innovation, the industrial sector, the way in which the design process has been influenced by artificial intelligence. There are incredible supplier companies have been using this technology for the benefit of our productivity, but it is following a rules-based order. This is a national call to action in terms of the guardrails that we need to put up on AI and to look at costs. The American consumer is in arrears. Okay, we've got $1.3 trillion of credit card debt. Mark my words, this is one that keeps me up at night as someone who served in the Obama administration under Steve Ratner and Ron Bloom on the U.S. Auto Rescue. We all remember that time period where the housing sector was bottoming out, our industrial sector was staring off a precipice. If we get this ballooning consumer debt continuing to grow, because the math doesn't math. I mean, even the Wall Street Journal's writing about this, right? The grocery bill's high, the utility bill's high, accessing of technology costs is high, and we could start to see defaulting. And in Michigan, this concerns me when jobs are on the line. So we have got to bolster American innovation in a place called Michigan, is always my preference, but we have got to bolster American innovation and call for action right now. We can't be laissez-faire. They manipulate markets, they manipulate open free market capitalism. We still want that system, our rules-based system where we're, a democracy promoting freedom and the pursuit of happiness. But my goodness gracious, you can't just let these guys come in, and eat our lunch. It's just not gonna work. And so, look, I was in an R&D lab before I was in elected office. I was in what is called the IoT space, right? I'm sure many of you in this room know about it. That's AI now. That is artificial intelligence. We were looking at basic scientific research, workforce development, and then technology transfer in this space. We need to be continuing to do that work. Those are amazing investment models, because I know here we're also talking about investing in America. And it's a challenge right now because of the consumer debt position, because of what is going on with our national fiscal debt position, which is another challenge for us. So we've got to look at growing our economy strategically, rigorously, paying down our debt, and continuing to invest to win the future.
We're going to be talking a lot about debt with Congressman Schweikert, who's coming up in just a few moments. But I know you've been a big proponent of the CHIPS Act.
Yeah.
And no surprise, the Trump administration, has criticized that. President Trump has called it corporate welfare. What do you say to those critics, and what would you say to this room to show that, to say that the milestones have been hit, and in the next 2 years, what milestones need to be hit in the CHIPS Act to say that this was worth it?
Well, even more importantly, it's a 21st century industrial policy approach. The reason why foreign markets took over chip manufacturing and critical minerals processing and refining, two things that we were talking about and identifying as weaknesses and challenges while we were saving the auto industry in the Obama administration, by the way, through bipartisan action, is because foreign entities used incentives. Yes, they had low labor costs. We don't want to overlook it. But they gave these industries a reason to invest. When we did chips, large dollar figure, $52 billion. By the way, it was bipartisan. You know, I stood behind the president when he was signing it into law with Democrats and Republicans. Within 1 quarter, it was signed in August of 2022, and within 1 quarter of being signed, we had $200 billion of capital commitments from the private sector. By the end of the president's term, we had $500 billion. I mean, this thing is paying for itself. Now, we've obviously seen chip manufacturing coming back, you know, from the soup to nuts perspective, some of the things that former Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo would talk about, you know, from the original conception phase to shipment. And that's where we want to be, in that sweet spot as a country. We can't stop. Michigan is ripe for this right now, particularly in terms of this other missing piece of our supply chain called critical minerals and the processing and refining that goes on to the tune of 85 to 95% in China. We're paying to ship it in, and we're dealing with rising costs and lost jobs as a result. I have enterprises in my state, Cerba Solutions, Hemlock Semiconductor, by the way, that's benefited from the CHIPS Act and would benefit from this same type of approach, of which I codified in my legislation called the Unearth America's Future Act. I encourage everyone here to look at that legislation. It's a 100-page bill. It's raw, it's ripe, it's good. 3-pronged approach: loan guarantees, tax credits, and an R&D center of excellence to lessen our dependence on China, create jobs, Michigan jobs always, and lower costs. And this is dovetailing from a 21st century industrial policy approach. Look, it's nice to reflect, memorably on the time period of Abe Lincoln, as the previous speaker was doing. But we are in the 21st century. We are competing with a Chinese Communist Party that is coming to eat our lunch if we don't move. I want to move in the American way, And so, look, I actually think I can continue to convince these guys to work with me on critical minerals. I think I got a good bill here for Michigan and the nation. I come from one of the states that's just one of a few left whose economy drives through the industrial manufacturing sector. It's an exciting time. We got the moonshot, seething through us with new mobility solutions and clearly, I'm very fired up about it.
Yes, I can see the passion. I can feel that passion. So just a last question to you, because you mentioned that you were there at the auto rescue, the bailout back in the great financial crisis. And it always takes a crisis to bring two sides together. So I'm curious, from your time then, what's the playbook, or what do you tear out of that moment and what you learned to work now?
Well, look, I think it's another call to action to say that we shouldn't wait for crisis to act. Cue the policy nerds, right? Cue the dedicated public servants who not only will identify challenges and problems, but create and offer solutions and lead around them. I came to Congress during a polarized time. It's clearly become only more polarized. What I have chosen to do is talk about the things that bring us together. Looking at our manufacturing sector and workforce development opportunities. You mentioned the time I've spent on the Science Committee. Tune into our hearings. They're actually very bipartisan. They're very thoughtful. I had one of my first pieces of legislation signed under the president's first term on artificial intelligence, the detection of deep fake technologies. And so a lot of times when we pursue those strategies, We can make investments for today that yield tremendous results for tomorrow.
Well, Congressman Stevens, thank you so much for joining us. Really great to have you here. Thank you. Exit this way. So I'm going to bring up, we were talking about the budget, the federal budget, and this is someone who was joining us, who joined us last year on Invest America, our very first conference, Congressman Schweikert. Congressman Schweikert, please welcome you to the stage. Great to see you again.
You know, after last year, I assumed I was never going to get another invitation.
Well, even better, we have actually a soundbite from what you said last year.
I'm sure it will be nothing inflammatory.
All right, let's play that.
Washington's intellect has so degraded where, you know, the left screams about things on Medicaid, and then you showed the charts, and it doesn't add up. And then my side, we scream about things, we make up economics, and that's not in the charts. And it's like you and I are trying to operate in a math-free environment.
Math-free environment. Has anything gotten quieter?
No. Matter of fact, you know you're in trouble when your 10-year-old daughter says, Daddy's going to go to work in a math-free zone.
Okay, so math-free zone. How do we make the math work here?
Well, the problem is, and I lay this at my footstep, but also yours. Whether it be media, whether the way we communicate, whether the perversity from the fake news, and I hate using that term, but if any of you ever look at your social media accounts, how many things will you hear, if we just did this? And none of us have enough time saying, that's not how it works. A couple moments ago in the back room, I was doing a Arizona talk radio show for a couple minutes about Social Security and the trust fund depletion, and a couple of the calls in, they stole the money, this, that. Saying, no, that's not how it works. And it's really hard to take on very complex, very difficult subjects when you don't even have a communal understanding or anyone willing to actually write about it. And look,
what does that mean, anyone willing to write about it?
But saying, here's actually how it works. Okay, the Social Security example, it's a demographic issue. It's a simple demographic issue. We've gone 40 years, not enough workers, not enough children. So in, 6 years, 3 months, Americans take a 24% cut in their Social Security account, and we double senior poverty. I've been saying that for 15 years. Have any of you have ever not been able to sleep, so you watched one of my floor speeches, it puts you to sleep immediately? Okay, that was funny. But what happens when the biggest issue in front of us, I would argue, is demographics? But because it's complex and it doesn't have something salacious or a shiny object, it's harder to talk about. Next year, our baseline math is we'll have fewer under 18 than we had 20 years ago, but double the number of our brothers and sisters 65 and up. So if any of you are representing business concerns or those things, are you prepared for in 28 months, 29 months, over half the federal spending will go to those of us 65 and up? Okay, that means what? And how do you grow the economy? And how do you deliver health care?
Yeah.
And there's my frustration. We're sort of living for today, living to survive the next election, not doing the basic things required to actually have this be another American century.
So, Congressman, I would argue, though, that I think those conversations are being had. You know,
really?
You are, well, I'm not going to say here in Washington, but I'm saying across the country, I think there's growing public discourse around falling fertility rates. Well, hang on, around demographic changes, around the aging population. However, as you just saw on the stage, we have Peter Navarro talking about not raising rates and the tariff wall, and then Congressman Stevens talking about protecting critical minerals, which I know you actually have agreement with her on that, as well as protecting the auto industry. So there's a lot of conversations about the here and now and how to move things forward. But I wonder, you're bringing in a larger conversation around, yes, next 5 years, okay, these are the conversations the next 5 years. What about the next 20, 25 years? What about the next 50 years?
Just help me survive, because this is immediate. Okay, as of, I think it was Friday, we were borrowing about $93,000 a second. And so...
That's incredible.
No, but here's the thing, it should enrage us. If you actually look like in Doge, think about how many articles your paper, how many speeches my side gave on Doge. And please listen, I'm a big supporter of using technology to find everything you can through government. But what was the total value of what was actually executed in spending reductions through Doge?
I don't know.
About $7 billion. We borrowed 7.7 yesterday. We didn't even cover a single day's worth of borrowing. So at what point do you have a discussion of saying, okay, critical minerals. First off, why is something a rare earth? It's not because it's rare to find, it's in tiny. So some rare earths require 100 steps. 100 steps. I have a whole chart at the office to process. It's not the mineral, it's the requirements, the environmental rules, the distribution, all the things to do the refining. And many of the refinement, we don't actually have the IP for. So what happens when it's a combination of technology? The other side is...
so it's not just enough to discover it, you've got to actually extract it.
And there's actually models out there that say just the recycling of current products in the United States would actually provide more than adequate for a couple decades. But it's the lack of understanding of the actual underlying science, because it's geeky and doesn't get you on television if you actually walk through the math.
So let's just talk a little bit more about the math. The Congressional Budget Office recently put out a report saying that in order to cover Social Security and Medicare, that in the future, we would have to borrow enough that we would push the federal debt to 156% of GDP by 2055.
And if you use what's now projected to be increases in baseline interest rates for the entire world, it's substantially more. We calculate in 2033, the first year of full exhaustion of the Social Security and Medicare Trust Fund, it's about $638 billion just that year, just to cover the shortfalls in the trust fund.
Just that year.
Just that year. So if the defense budget's $1 trillion, you start to think about, oh, wow, 60% equal to, there's a lack of understanding the scale that's coming at us. And every day we wait, that math gets much harder. But the fact of the matter is, you're a Democrat, Republican, you mention the word Social Security, and the DCCC, or reverse, the RNs, is writing commercials to beat the crap out of you because you're not allowed to say it. What's happened when the political consultants are now having more influence on actual policy making? It's terrifying, because back to my original joke that's based in truth, we're a math-free zone because the math doesn't get you elected.
Right, and so there's a lot of noise all the time that's avoiding the math. So my question to you then is if we're barreling towards this and no one's talking honestly, let's just be frank here, right? No one's talking honestly about what is very likely to happen. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most likely, are we going to see this scenario play out? Meaning that we are going to be over borrowing to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. How likely is that scenario going to play out?
Well, we're already doing that today. I mean, look.
Even more so, to the crisis point, to the 156% of GDP by 2055. It could be even worse according to your calculations.
Yeah, but what's to stop us? The bond market in the next year or two, the bond market will, if we keep this up and don't convince the world capital markets that we're serious, the bond market will actually run this country. And I know that sounds dour, but just think of this. The number of basis points moved, so the cost of financing from February to the last couple of weeks, just that difference is about an additional $1.3, $1.4 trillion of just interest over the 10 years. And yet, how many are congressional staff around here? Okay. And so all day long, you have a parade of people coming into your office, either asking for more money or wanting you to basically produce a barrier to entry for competition. I can make the math work. There is ways to do it. But one of the first things you have to have is a holistic theory of, oh, wow, the United States has almost had zero population growth. The Census Bureau says in the next 5 years, we're going to actually go negative. I need actually to be able to start to legalize creative destruction in the society again. We need to legalize the adoption of technology to crash the price of healthcare. We need to, and you have to do it all at the same time. We can barely agree to name a post office these days. So what happens when there's solutions? We can make it work. We just would have to do lots of hard things, and there'll be armies of special interests, people we represent, we love, but that disruption of adopting technology, synthetic biology, robots, markets, all these things is, the folks who will be buying full-page ads in your publication beating the crap out of us for, why are we doing this? So we don't have a choice.
So I'm hearing Congressman Schweikert attend from you on, it's very likely we're going to hit this situation.
Yeah, well, how many people would have sat here with you if this were a decade ago saying, we'll never go over 100% of debt to GDP, and we just blew through it.
Here we are, yeah.
And if the CBO, OMB projections, the only ones got the debt right, I'll give it to some of my economists who are sitting in the room. We projected some of the debt projections for this fiscal year, and we're on track. And we were attacked for being dour, but...
But you were right.
Yeah.
So Congressman, last time you were sitting here, also last year, you were talking about the business community and how they need to show up. And I think you used the word rent seekers. What you have found is that CEOs and other business leaders will call your office looking for a specific solution to a problem, but not working with you. And you correct me if I'm wrong, but not working with your office or even with Washington on the bigger picture, like demographics. So has that changed?
No.
Our leaders showing up? Not at all?
No. All right, let's do the quick story so we put it in context. And I'm sorry to repeat myself from last year. 2017, I'm on Ways and Means. We're doing the first big tax reform in 30 plus years. I could not pick up this thing without it being some of the aristocracy of corporations in the United States. Hey, if you did this, this would help our bank. If you did this, this would help. Hey, we would repatriate our intellectual property back to the United States. The day we passed the tax reform in 2017, never heard from these people again. I went 5.5 years without hearing from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, even though I'm number 4 in Ways and Means, because the next thing said, okay, we got what we wanted out of the tax system. Now let's go do the rent seeking on CHIPS Act and all these other things where now it's substantially industrial policy. And the lobbyist community and those things are paid to do that. And now we actually have a situation, I believe, in the United States where we're on the cusp of so many technology miracles, whether it be synthetic biology, AI, all these other things. And the barriers of the next generation that would pop up economic vitality, it worries me. When it's illegal functionally to modernize a port, so the United States has the least efficient ports in the industrialized world, all these other things that happen around us. So you say, we're going to do this policy, but why don't they give us the economic robustness they should? It's because we didn't fix all the things in the circle. And almost no one thinks or talks this way in DC. And
In DC, but also with the business community?
oh yeah, the business community has crushed my soul. For many of us who are sort of the last remaining sort of free market Republicans, we have a running joke in the office to try to put it, and much of your audience here is too young, but there used to be this thing called Blockbuster Video. Now, how many of you went to Blockbuster Video this weekend to go get your little silver disc? Of course not, because technology came along, now you hit a button and you have the world's media in front of you. If Blockbuster Video had hired enough lobbyists, Congress would have probably slowed down the internet so Netflix couldn't eat in their book of business. Now that was, if you actually look at the data, that was a huge economic shift, the amount of retail space, the amount of employees, those things that over just a couple of years went empty, lost their, but if you actually look at the vitality it produced in the economy,
Right.
you know, I use that as an example because most people sort of had that intimate experience. I would argue that particularly one of my specialties is healthcare and healthcare financing. There's so many things we could do today to dramatically change the cost of healthcare and have our population be healthier. I just can't overcome the bureaucracy and the incumbent protection model of saying, David, we like there being $35 billion last year in duplicative MRI, X-rays, ultrasounds, CTs, and yet if I did that MRI and just put it on grandma's phone and she took it with her to her next doctor and hit the button and there it's on the screens, we wouldn't have to do a duplicative one, but then the people that make their money on the duplications,
Yeah.
and so they have an army of lobbyists. We've hit a wall
Yep.
where the things, so the decision here is we'll just borrow the money and
Right.
put it
Kick the
on.
can down the road. Yeah.
But the interest cost, when interest now is the second biggest expense in the federal government, and we're interest fragile, little movements of interest rates now cost a fortune, maybe it's time for rethinking.
Congressman, I know we have to wrap up, but you mentioned something that just piqued my interest about, or you said crushed my soul is what the business community has done. So on the flip side, just really quickly, what isn't crushing your soul these days?
I am elated that there's technology coming. I believe we're within the next few years the most cancers to cure. But when we do that, we're now going to have to change FDA modeling of phase 3s, phase 3As, how you bring a product to market. We have other issues of what happens if you spend $1 billion bringing a drug to market, but now technology, AI, other things will model the next molecule in half the time so you can't amortize your full patent. There's great things happening.
Okay.
We do not have America's rules, regulations, laws, financing lined up for the speed of disruption that's coming. And because of that, we're going to basically slow down the very things that actually save us economically.
Okay, I wanted to end on a positive note, though. But
Look,
right.
there's a way. Look, be hopeful. Look, I'm 64. My wife's my age, and we've adopted. I have a 3-year-old. That's pathologically optimistic.
Okay, great. Congressman, thank you so much. We'll walk this way. It's
All
great,
right,
great to see you.
And joining us now to discuss security risks in the economy and energy sector, please welcome to the stage Sylvan Lane, Business and Economy Editor at The Hill, with guests Caroline Baxter, Director of the Converging Risk Lab at the Council on Strategic Risks, and Clay Lowry, Executive Vice President of Research and Policy at the Institute of International Finance.
Well, thank you all again so much for coming out today, and I want to thank our guests for their insight and their wisdom today. As you've heard, we're going to talk a little bit about the various ways that national security risks, energy, and the economy all come together. And, as a business journalist for about a decade, I would always joke with our energy and defense reporters that if all 3 of us are writing about the same thing, something bad must be going on in the world. So, Caroline, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, speaking of converging risks, how all of these different factors are currently coming together and creating this moment of higher precarity, both economically and in a national security format?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thank you very much to The Hill for having me. Anytime I get to share a stage with someone like Clay is a good day for me, and I'm excited to share some thoughts. So at the Converging Risks Lab, which is an institute within the Council on Strategic Risks, we're looking at the intersection of a couple different moving targets. One is the acceleration of the deployment of artificial intelligence, and what that means for both the energy grid and the raw materials that have to go into creating the data centers. Two, we're looking at the impact of the war in Iran on the global economy and the pressure that that is putting on oil importing states. And then three, we're looking at the intersection of a kind of fractious geopolitical moment, which is probably, in our estimation, going to have a bit of a long tail. So what that means is if you are the United States and the American way of war depends upon fighting alongside allies and partners, and you and your allies and partners are all in a geopolitical crisis in terms of energy, what that means is as inflation goes up, your budgets are going to shrink, and you're going to have to start making some really hard choices between the money that you're going to put towards either oil production or, in the case of Japan, increasing your national spending on your defense budgets. It's going to be very, very hard to do both. But right now is when we need to start building our readiness for the future fights that we're going to need to have. Artificial intelligence matters because if you're also thinking about reducing your dependence on oil, you're going to start thinking about renewable sources of energy. The same amount of copper will go into both a wind turbine and a data center, and you only have one ingot. Where do you make that choice? That is imperfect. Anyone who's served in government, as I have, knows that there's no such thing as a clean policy. There's no such thing as a clean decision. Everything is going to have externalities, but understanding that risk in that trade space is going to be really important. So at CRL, we use a lot of tabletop exercises, wargaming, scenario exercises, backcasting, to put people in a worst case scenario, work backwards, and try to find those mile markers along the way and create policies that will not be perfect, but will at least have boundable risks.
And as you're going through those tabletop games, those simulations, what have you found that you didn't know about before? Did you discover anything that kind of piqued your curiosity or interest about this current moment?
So there's been a couple things. We've been doing a lot of work in Japan and South Korea, two highly industrialized nations that have, for various different reasons, have been trying to transition to renewable energy. The common thread between them, of course, is that they both import 98% thereabouts of their energy from abroad, and what's going on with the Strait of Hormuz is absolutely killing them. So they're going to have to make some really dangerous trade spaces. The thing that we've learned over the course of doing this work is the importance of a really resilient energy grid. And you need an energy grid that can withstand and stand up to an influx of different kinds of power. Transmission lines are going to need to change. Having the transistors in order to carry the load from the solar to the wind farms all the way through the domestic populations. Something that's come up a lot is the tensile strength of the relationship between a federal government and the local government. Japan has prefectures, and every single prefecture has a significant amount of power. That is relatively the same as the 50 states in the United States that all have to come together to understand how a federal grid can work. So the national security importance of a reliable energy grid has been something that's come out a lot.
Certainly, and I think that's a really interesting point to think about in terms of the way that different countries are trying to prioritize these different investments and balance those against the security risks. And Clay, I know you've spent a considerable amount of time throughout your career at various points looking at these balances of investment and national security risk. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about what the current framework where we have, key allies and partners facing these different problems, but we're also looking to expand our own economy and our own interests here. How can the U.S. balance that, and just what about this current environment makes it difficult to do so?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I apologize that I'm covering up your pillow. And it's great to be on stage with Caroline, and fascinated just by their answers she just gave. So in terms of balancing, the United States is the biggest market in the world, the biggest economy in the world. There's a lot of clarity and certainty about the U.S. system, and so that is a good thing, and that actually is a big attraction for investment in the United States. Secondly, we're in the middle of, so there's kind of on the positive side, there is, we're in the middle of a terms of trade shock that's a positive terms of trade shock for the United States. And that is because energy prices, we are actually a net exporter of energy. And so that actually is something that's pretty positive. And third, Caroline mentioned it, which is the artificial intelligence and what that is actually doing for our economy on the negative side. So there's a lot of concern about how policymaking is actually happening here in the United States. It is, to say chaotic would be an understatement. And it's not just the executive branch. I mean, I've heard some of the congressional leaders up here on stage. I mean, a lot of people have just given up on Congress. And so so your executive branch is doing everything, and obviously President Trump has a different way of doing things. There is some volatility, and so that creates volatility outside the borders of the United States for international audiences. Some of those are economic or mathematical, but some of them are just kind of like, can you count on the United States? And so how to strike that balance is kind of an important aspect of the U.S.'s role in the world and what we're going to be, how we're going to be seen. I think right now, we talk to a lot of people. I work for a group that works with 60 countries or something like that. There's a lot of concern about what's happening in the United States and the role that the U.S. is playing out there, whether it's on foreign policy, on some economic policy issues, and obviously what's happening right now in the Middle East is driving a lot of that conversation.
And to that point, Clay, about the U.S.'s position in the world and its relationships with different countries, I mean, obviously over the past year and a half, we've seen some pretty considerable tensions between the United States and allies such as Mexico and Canada that it, once seemed impossible to think of disputes of this level to the point where the fundamental nature of these relationships are being evaluated. And we're seeing that a little bit in Europe too, with the president talking about the various ways he wants to reposition troops and other matters like that. What my question is while the U.S. is having these higher tensions with its allies, do you think it's possible for it to generate the level of national cooperation and to preserve its standing in the world as the destination for investment and the global economy?
I think you have to bifurcate that. Can the United States actually, with the way we are approaching our countries that we have often typically been allies with, you mentioned Canada and Mexico, there's a number of countries in Europe, it's hard to imagine that there's a lot of faith in what we're doing. I mean, I had a very difficult day up in Toronto a couple months ago. It just, work-wise, nothing bad. But then at the end of the day, I just want to, I'm just tired, and I just want to have a glass of bourbon.
Couldn't get it, could you?
They wouldn't sell it to me. There was no bourbon. And that was because basically the Canadians had boycotted it. And I was just like, I hadn't put two and two together. And so there I'm like, nice scotch would be fine then. I mean, so that is a bad thing. Now, on the good side, as I mentioned, the U.S. is still, from a relative perspective, is one, in advanced economies, is still growing better than most other countries. It is still the biggest markets that are very deep, and so that is an attraction. That's an attraction for direct investors. That's an attraction for portfolio investors. And so that makes it hard to disconnect completely from the United States. So even if a country is angry with the United States, I mean really angry, it's hard to disconnect. And that is, and I mean the Canadians are a perfect example. They're highly dependent on the US economy. That doesn't mean that they're not going to cut me off from my bourbon, which probably my wife would appreciate. But it is, and you see, I mean, we heard the Congresswoman earlier about how Prime Minister Carney has been looking to try to do deals with China. It is making people rethink what are my supply chains, my economic coordination that I should do. But it's still the fact that you still have to do business with the United States just because of the size of our economy, the depth, our institutions, et cetera.
I'll jump on that really quickly if I can. I absolutely agree with what Clay was talking about, and I think I'll add that I think there's going to be a little bit of a tail to this that we're going to experience whatever the new administration turns out to be in 2029, whereby when you have a country of this magnitude, this importance, that is perceived, rightly or wrongly, to be volatile, to be hard to predict, the next administration is going to inherit that, and whatever policies of any kind that administration is going to have, which by virtue of our role in the world, and whether or not we want to be the American colossus bestride the world, we still are, will need our allies and partners to work with. I think there are going to be some headwinds with that across the board.
Speaking of working with allies and partners and various headwinds, obviously the situation in Iran with the Strait of Hormuz is a pretty clear example of the difficulties that the U.S. is having, to put it lightly, with countries that might be mad at us, and the difficulties that the U.S. is having in terms of getting partners on board with its preferred strategy. And I wanted to ask you both, what do you think, obviously the short-term impact, higher oil prices, higher national security risks, but I guess my question is, what do you think the long-term implications of what's already happened might have been, assuming that there could be some sort of resolution within the somewhat near future?
Well, given what I've been working on and energy being a part of this summit, I think we are seeing right now a harder kind of left rudder turn towards renewables across the board. And I think that there has already been a lot of work done for the infrastructure for that push, not just in Japan and Korea, as I talked about, but certainly within NATO, and also in the United States. I think it was last year that there was like a 30% increase in battery storage year over year, which is pretty significant. Now, anytime you talk about renewable energy, the topic that comes up a lot is China. China corners the market. China owns all the renewable energy, or the rare earth minerals, I should say. That is true, and it is also true that there are other sources. And I think what we've seen in those countries that are using the Iran war as an opportunity that should not be let go to waste have been doing is redoubling their efforts on battery storage, where if you have a solar farm that will last 30 years and you can power a whole city with one solar farm, it reduces the need to get more minerals to buy the things to make another solar farm. You can reduce the spread. And I think there's been a big push in the countries that have been thinking that through that will, I think, yield some benefits. Now let's spin the wheel of time forward and say that the United States has cracked the code on it. We do have an incredibly robust industrial base, and we also have a lot of creativity. We are used to making good things come out of hard problems. I think we'll be able to reap a significant soft power reward in the future if we are able to generate significant advances in terms of battery storage from renewable sources. So I think that's a very good thing. And in addition, the burden sharing for sourcing of renewables and refining renewables, I think, will be another opportunity for some diplomacy, piggybacking off of the energy and economic requirements. So that would be one thing.
If I could just add to that, I think those are really good points. My point, I think, is slightly related, is one of the interesting things that you've seen is, all right, so I work with a lot of financial services firms, follow the markets. The markets actually, in the United States at least, and some other countries, have done actually fairly well. I mean, part of that is for outside factors that have very little to do with the Middle East. But there is it seems like if you talk to the real oil experts, the energy experts, they would say, you guys are seriously smoking some dope or something, because this Strait of Hormuz, this is the biggest shock since the 1970s. It is a real problem, and it's going to back up. And we haven't really seen that. Yes, we've seen prices rise by, well, we saw a quick rise in prices by about 30% or 40%, but it's kind of stabilized there. And even though we haven't seen the war get that much better outside of this ceasefire off and on, off and off and off and on. What I think that you're seeing, though, is, for instance, a country like China. China is a huge importer of energy. You will, if you looked at the statistics, their energy imports are way down, way down, and that's because they are drawing down on the reserves. And so I think what you are going to see is you're going to see other countries start to do what China did in advance of all of this, which is build up their reserves. Second is I think, and this kind of goes a little bit to Carolyn's point, is there's going to be alternatives. How do I find my way around the Strait of Hormuz? I mean, this is a problem. And so I think you're going to start seeing other ways around, but not just alternative energies. You'll see more pipelines and so forth. And third is this is a supply chain shock. It is not just an oil shock. And so a supply chain shock, we saw it in COVID. This is a smaller version, obviously, but how do supply chains get reworked? And I'm not pressing it enough to figure that out, but I think that that's what you might start paying attention to is how do supply chains change in the short term, but also in the medium term.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to squeeze in at least a couple of questions about AI, which feels like a risky game, but to do it at the end of a panel instead of the beginning of one. But, obviously, something that we've spent a lot of time at the Hill thinking about, and we got a great story in our paper tomorrow coming out about the AI impact on the job market and the overall economy. And I guess my question is, given the economic growth we've seen from the data center build out, but also these rising concerns about the way AI might change the nature of jobs and working, is this something that could be net beneficial to the economy, or are we looking at something that could create risks down the road that expose us to not only economic risks, but potential national security risks if we somehow fall behind or end up in a situation where maybe we move too far ahead and end up doing something to our domestic economy that, is undesirable?
So it's a good question, tough question. So if I say something positive about artificial intelligence on a college campus, I'd probably be booed off of it, it sounds like. But look, I think that AI has been, in some respects, maybe the savior of the 2025 economy in the United States and potentially the 2026 economy. It is been, the investment in AI has helped boost the economy in a way so that some of the impact that economists were predicting would happen because of all the tariffs, the back and forth, the crazy tariffs that went up and down and so forth, didn't seem to have that huge of an impact on the United States economy. And a lot of that is because of the investment in AI, which really is not that much related to tariffs, except for kind of the import of some of the products that are involved. The question will be is, can that continue? And there's the politics of data centers are bad, et cetera, but can that type of investment, it's not like a lot of the AI firms are making tons of money. NVIDIA is making lots of money. Probably a lot of the AI firms I know nothing about are making a lot of money, but there are a lot of others who are just investing. Does it pay off? Is that investment, and we don't know the answer to that right now. Then, what type of kick does it have on productivity? Well, actually, two things. One is productivity, the other is employment. If you look at the economy, it did pretty well in 2025, and it's held in there in 2026 despite all the uncertainties that are going on in the global economy. But it does seem to be one where the labor markets still are semi-soft. I mean, they're not, so that means that basically they're not, they're no hire, no fire type of economy. And what we have to figure out is whether or not, is it because AI is just kind of, it doesn't necessarily displace workers crazily, but at the same time you don't actually, and I don't know. I mean, creative destruction would suggest that that's not going to hold. Productivity is maybe like, so the congressman was up here before talking about the fiscal situation. By the way, I didn't say this. That is a huge issue for outsiders, people outside the United States. Should we be investing in U.S. bonds? This is getting kind of tricky on their fiscal situation. If you listen to the congressman, you might say, no. But can productivity, if you look at CBO estimates, our debt to GDP skyrockets over the next 10 years. I mean, it's already high. If productivity actually increases at the pace that it could, somewhat driven by AI, you do at least get a possibility of that fiscal situation stabilizing to a certain extent. It doesn't go down. It just stabilizes to a certain extent. The only way it's going to go down is if our political parties get together and figure this out, which that's probably not going to happen. But anyway, so.
The degree to which AI is going to benefit the future depends entirely on our ability to determine where should AI be and where should it not. AI has been compared to everything from the Industrial Revolution, the Agricultural Revolution, the internet, blah, 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 blah. I think all of that is wrong. AI is the new plastic. AI is everywhere. It is in my toothbrush. It is in my refrigerator. It is in an F-35. It is in my car. It is in my child's education. None of that bespeaks a sober, distinguishing criteria for what AI is going to solve. It's just kind of sprinkled everywhere. It's like a flavor enhancement. It's like the MSG. That's not going to generate anything useful. It's just going to be more of the same. And what we've seen with plastic is that in the 60s, we knew that plastic was probably pretty bad. In the 70s, we found it in the Sargasso Sea. In the 90s, we started finding it in human placentas. And now we have garbage dumps in the trash pile in the Atlantic Ocean. We knew all that was happening. The AI companies know that AI is probably not the best for 16-year-olds, but whatever, let it ride. No, we need to start making some active choices. I think AI could be absolutely phenomenal for productivity, for labor gains, for healthcare, as the congressman mentioned, curing cancer. But it's not going to be a silver bullet, and we need to have a little bit more bravery in calling it like it is when we see AI being where it shouldn't be.
Well, with that, Caroline, Clay, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. You've given us a lot to think about and a lot of expertise to help guide us. So thank you so much for your insight today.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
We can come.
Okay, I'd like to welcome up our next guests, Erica York, Vice President of Federal Tax Policy at the Tax Foundation, and Eugene Laney, the President and CEO of American Association of Exporters and Importers. Welcome, Erica and Eugene.
Thank you.
So it's great to have both of you because I'd love to get both of your perspectives on the conversations that we've heard this morning. And Erica, maybe I'll start with you because, or I'd like to start with you. We have Peter Navarro up here kickstarting our morning. And, I'd asked him about tax revenue from these multiple tariffs that we've seen over the last 12, 18 months. And, his response was that, the revenue is falling short because it's being challenged in several courts. I know you've done a lot of number crunching. We had Congressman Schweikert up here talking about math is the math thing. So I know you've done a lot of math here. Regardless of whether, what are these courts ultimately going to allow or not allow, what are you finding with these tariffs or the tariff wall, as Peter Navarro had talked about?
Yeah, when it comes to revenue implications of tariffs, like any other type of tax, people change their behavior when you change a tax rate. And so if you look at some of what we would call naive revenue estimates of tariffs, these are often the ones that the Trump administration touts. They will just take the tariff rate, they will look at imports before the tariffs, they'll multiply the two, and they'll say, this is how much revenue tariffs are going to bring in. That's where you got like the $600 billion figure that was talked about a lot in early 2025. If you look at the actual revenues that came in, it was about $270 billion in calendar year 2025 compared to about $80 billion in calendar year 2024. So a substantial increase. Obviously, when you increase a tax, it's going to increase tax revenue, but it's also going to cause behavior changes. People will import less. Avoidance and evasion behavior will increase. You may see people trying to qualify for a lower tariff by reporting different numbers or routing things through third countries that face a lower tariff. And so when you account for those behavioral responses, the revenue-raising potential of tariffs erodes. And then when you account for the economic impact, it erodes further. Businesses slow down their investments. They invest less. They hire fewer workers. That has an impact on corporate income taxes, on individual income taxes, on payroll taxes. So you even offset some of the revenue that you raise when you account for these dynamics. They fell short too because there were a lot of changes, and then of course something like $166 billion of that $270 billion will have to be refunded because of the Supreme Court decision. So that also erodes the revenue capability when you use an illegal authority and have to refund it. But I don't think tariffs are the silver bullet for solving the budget problem. If you look at total US imports, it's about $3 trillion. If you did a revenue maximizing tariff, the most you could get a year would be $400 to $500 billion in revenue, and that would come at a significant economic cost to turn that dial all the way up.
And Eugene, I want to get your take on those behavioral changes and the impact, but I just had a quick follow-up for you, Erica,
Yeah.
on what you just said, because I remember back on that conversation with Peter, and the indicator he said he's looking at is ISM manufacturing index is going up. That's evidence to him that this is working. What do you say about that?
There are a lot of things that impact perceptions and sentiment, and I would say on the one hand, we've had the trade war and significant instability throughout 2025. We've counted that there were more than 50 official changes to US tariff policy, so the actual applied tariff rate that importers face bringing goods into the country changed more than 50 times throughout 2025. That doesn't even count the unofficial changes, the threats, the social media posts, the comments. So 2025 was a year of very heightened uncertainty. We've now moved out of that. There's still uncertainty. Obviously, last night there were investigations, findings from the 301 investigations announced, letting us know more tariff changes are coming. But there's been a sort of lid put on the uncertainty or a ceiling, because the president can't use these willy-nilly tariff authorities. And so I think on the one hand, because there's less uncertainty, that is leading to better outlook. On the other hand, we had a huge tax law enacted last year, a huge tax law that had really good, important provisions for manufacturers, like full expensing for capital investment, full expensing for R&D, a new manufacturing structures expensing provision. So you can't just look at a sentiment number and say it's because of this one policy that I like. You have to kind of look more holistically.
Eugene, so tell me, how are your members navigating these challenges?
Well, the big thing for our members is right now we're sort of, a lot of our members are caught up in what I would call decision friction. And what this is based on, there's a lot of decision traffic around what should we do next, right? So the unique thing of every time a tariff comes out, and you mentioned one last night, to be official, we had 5 in the last 18 hours. And so what usually happens is that you have a war room of all the trade compliance folks, the government affairs folks, the legal, pricing, supply chain. They all get together in a war room and figure out how to address all these tariffs. The important thing to note here is as they're meeting today to deal with the tariffs that happened last night, they're putting off and trading off investment decisions. They're trading off launching a new product. These are the types of things that are keeping our members up at night, because it's not so much uncertainty, it's just that friction on what do we do next? What are the trade-offs? And all the traffic that is held up on launching new products, investing back in the US, all those different things that is making it difficult for our companies to move forward. And so it's sort of like they're pregnant with prosperity in the sense they want to grow, but they're being held back, by these tariffs and some of these other trade measures.
But it sounds like, as Erica was saying, that there may be a lid eventually on some of this, maybe some less, not stability, but let's say less instability going forward. And of course, we were also talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that did help companies, with these tax breaks. So how is that helping? Is that helping?
There's the one thing to report is that these companies are enormously resilient. And the great thing is that they've been able to leverage the bill from last year. They've been able to leverage AI. AI in the trade community is a proof concept that it works really well to help you. They're using AI to improve classification. They're using AI to improve supply chain mapping. They're using AI to identify where they move their next manufacturing plant. They're using AI to sort of make sure that they're doing the right thing once when it comes to regulations. So AI has helped them a lot. And then they've learned so much from going back to 2019 when they were asked to move out of China. They learned lessons from there where they could figure out where they could move to place them in better position. The challenge for them now is that back in 2019, they were asked to move out of China into Mexico, but now there's a question of uncertainty around will we have a USMCA agreement. And so these companies really just want certainty, and then more importantly, they want the ability to provide inputs to help the government make the best policy decisions and give the right guidance so that companies can do the right thing. So many small and medium-sized businesses, they don't have a trade compliance person. They don't have a legal person. They don't have a government affairs person. Congressman Schweizer's point, they don't have a lobbyist who can come up here and lobby for them. So they're dealing with things every single day, and they have to make a decision. Do I close my business, or do I decide not to go on this trade mission to Dubai or someplace else to find me a new market? And so that decision friction is what they're dealing with constantly.
And just out of curiosity, the refunds that are being processed, are companies getting refunds? Are they hitting bureaucratic red tape? What's going on there?
Yeah, so companies, so one of the things that we advocated for immediately is that we knew this wasn't a complex process, that CBP had the ability, and CBP has always been good about working with the trade to figure out a way forward. And so one of the things we recommended is deal with the less complex refunds first, which they've done, and then deal with the more complex. And so CBP, I think, is positioned to move to that next phase. But now the DOJ has sort of put on the brakes and said that, we need to find the right process and procedure, or we need the right authorization in order to move to that second phase. The reality is the Supreme Court has ruled the tariffs are illegal. Provide us, importers and, their money back, and they should have their money back.
Yeah.
And what's great, I sat down with a small business who said, if I can get my $8,500 back, I can go buy this new equipment plant. And maybe I can go on this trade mission that you want me to go on in Korea. And so that's the kind of investment that's going to come back to these companies if they're able to get these refunds back.
Yeah, particularly for the smaller businesses, like every single dollar counts.
Matters.
Erica, I want to switch now to the conversation we were having with Congressman Schweiker, who's been sort of sounding the alarm for years on the federal debt and the sort of reckoning that keeps getting pushed off, but eventually it will happen. And I would like to hear from your point of view, from the tax side, the longer we sort of kick the can down the road on doing something about our federal debt, what's going to happen tax-wise for us here?
Yeah, the longer we wait, the more painful the solution will be because the problem gets bigger and bigger and requires a bigger response. We recently published a paper that modeled, I think, at least 10 different really sizable tax increases to say, like, how much can tax even solve the problem? And the issue is that if you look at those CBO tables and you look at the debt to GDP trajectory and you look at the underlying drivers, what's happening to revenues as a share of GDP and spending as a share of GDP, spending is growing faster than the economy is growing. And that stems back to these demographic problems that Congressman Schweiker was talking about. And so even if you increase taxes substantially, with spending growing as a share of GDP growing faster than the economy grows, you can't ever bend that curve down. And that tells us that we need a combination of both spending reforms and well-designed tax reforms that don't damage the economy more than the revenue that they raise for the Treasury, because then debt as a share of GDP may not improve as much.
Yeah.
So I think tax has to be part of the conversation, but it can't be the only part of the conversation. And there is no one single tax increase or even a package of tax increases. We hear so many ideas like, just do a wealth tax, or just raise marginal tax rates to 70%, or just hike the corporate tax rate. None of those fix the problem, and then they make the economic problems even worse because they reduce the incentives that people face for investing, for working, for innovating and entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
So it can be part of the solution, but it can't be relied on to fix the problem.
What, just out of curiosity, because I know you study this so much, what is the creative solution we're not talking about? Or what is the solution? Okay, go ahead.
I don't think it takes too much creativity. We know the drivers on the spending side. It's entitlement programs, it's Social Security, it's Medicare. They need reforms. They need reforms to reduce how much we spend, and that's the political issue that Congressman Schweiker was talking about too. Everyone, I think, knows the drivers. Everyone knows the dials you need to turn, but there's a political cost to doing so. And until we get to that situation where the political cost isn't so large, or the political cost is worth whatever the economic cost of continuing on this path, until those incentives align,
yeah,
I don't think we will see action.
Right. So it's not so much creative, but it's really courage, is what
Yes.
is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Yeah. And Eugene, I'm curious, outside of, talking about taxes and the debt, although, we mentioned the One Big Beautiful Bill and how that has been helpful to companies, what is the one thing that your members are looking for, going forward that would have the greatest impact on them? What are they advocating for? What are you advocating for that would have the greatest impact on them?
Yeah, so my measurement of trade has always been, I call it the Under Armour test, right? So about an hour from here in Baltimore, Kevin Plank had a great idea of building an apparel company, by himself. He got in his grandmother's car, he drove around, sold apparel, he created a supply chain that was efficient. He found manufacturers, he leveraged free trade agreements, and then he was able in 10 years to compete with Adidas, Puma, and Nike. I always use that test when I go out and talk to small and medium-sized businesses or large companies. Do we have an environment where the next Kevin Plank, the next Jeff Bezos, the next, Steve Jobs, can they innovate something and then be able to sell that globally? And I think the tariffs have sort of slowed that down, because here's an interesting fact. If you're an SME and you're thinking about going global, where's the first place that you look at going? Nearby, right? Canada and Mexico. So right now, that uncertainty of whether we're going to be doing business with Canada, they weren't invited to the bilateral meetings last week, or the idea that we may blow up the whole USMCA agreement, that then tells that SME, I have no place to go global, because you want to go with friends first, right, which is the North and South. And so a lot of our companies are trying to figure out, where do we go next? And so I think we've got to return back to regular order, where we had Congress involved, leading the charge. We had an USMCA agreement that improved NAFTA. We all worked together, the public sector, the private sector, to create that bill. We created a review process that we're going through right now, which is going to create a better product. That's how it should be. We want to get back to regular order, and that's what our members are asking, where they can provide input. There's an implementation phase, and then there's a review phase to make sure we're doing the right thing.
That makes a lot of sense, and I want to just dig a little bit more into that on maybe a specific, let's say what would they like to see happen in the next, let's say, 12 months? What would they like to see happen?
No more tariffs. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. No, I think they want to get back to regular order, in the sense, even with these 301 and 232s, you have an opportunity to provide input. So a lot of our members are concerned about the tariffs, but they're able now to give feedback to Navarro and to USTR and others on some of the challenges, so that they can they can get proper guidance, figure out how to implement the tariffs, do the right thing, and move forward. And so I think that's what they're calling for more than anything else. And there's also that horizon that's coming up, the 2028. A lot of our members are concerned, what are the lifeline of some of these art agreements? How long will these reciprocal agreements last? What's going to happen with some of the tariffs? We do know that tariffs might be with us beyond 2028, as even with the change of administration. But a lot of our members it's that uncertainty, that 2-year window, that they're unsure of how to move forward and what investment decisions to make.
Yeah. I hear that loud and clear about wanting that certainty, because it's hard to allocate capital and make, as you said, business decisions without that certainty. Erica, same question to you, just on what is an unlock, let's say, in the next 12 months that you would like to see happen, that would just help unlock growth? It could even be something, you could look at it as, the smallest thing to happen to create the biggest impact on your side.
I think some of those wins have already been had with the One Big Beautiful Bill, particularly permanence for bonus depreciation, 100% expensing for short-lived assets, R&D expensing, because it gets at that stability question. These were provisions that were either temporary or phasing out, and now businesses know these are around. I can fully deduct the cost of new domestic investment when I make it. That lowers the cost of capital, and that should really start to take effect, because it does take businesses time to plan, to permit, to place those in service, and then even more time for those to start affecting productivity. So I think the certainty from the bill has unlocked that potential. The headwind against that, of course, is the uncertainty on the trade policy front, because at the same time you have this decrease in the cost of capital from changes in the bill, you have an increase in the cost of capital by applying tariffs to business inputs. So you're kind of giving with one hand and you're taking with the other, and you're layering an uncertainty on top of that, which really just acts like sand in the gears of the economy. Businesses will sit on their hands and wait before they will invest when they don't know what is the tariff rate going to be a month from now, 3 months from now.
Right.
So if we, kind of echoing what Eugene said, if we can get certainty on the tariff environment, even if it's certainty that tariffs are going to be in place for a while, that at least allows some planning to occur rather than what we have right now, which is just no clear idea of what's coming around the corner.
And just in the minute and a half that we have left, I know, Eugene, you had mentioned AI and smaller, medium-sized companies leveraging that. Are you starting to see unlocks there, or is the compute cost, the cost of even implementing AI, starting to sort of outweigh the benefits?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges, that the large U.S. shippers or traders can afford some of the larger AI products, either for classification, supply chain mapping, or to help with in the regulatory space. But small and medium-sized businesses, they have that enormous challenge. It's difficult for them to take on. But this is no different. I was in a forum. They said this is no different when we were trying to force companies to use MS Windows. It's the same thing. It takes a time for those AI companies to create products that are unique for SMEs, and I think they're moving in that direction. But eventually, when they move in that direction, as I said before, trade is a proof concept of how AI has allowed a lot of these companies to be nimble, make decisions, reduce that traffic, reduce that decision friction, and figure out what is the best means for them to move forward. It's really been the win out of all of this that we've gone through in the last year or so.
And Erica, you get final word. Net, a positive for the economy, AI?
Yeah, I think so. I think, like many speakers have said, it's what's been carrying the economy. And interestingly, it's also largely exempt from the tariffs. If you look at computer equipment imports, they are exempt from the baseline tariffs and the sectoral tariffs largely. So an interesting story there of what's driving growth and what is dragging growth down.
That's a good point. Very good point. All right. Well, thank you so much, Eric and Eugene, for joining us in this great conversation. Thank you. And you can exit here. And I'm just going to make a short announcement that we can get up, stretch our legs for about 15 minutes, and then we'll be back here with some other great guests. CFTC chairman, also the SBA administrator is going to be joining us on stage. So 15 minutes for those who are live streaming. Be back here at that time. So thanks so much.
If everyone can please take their seats, programming is beginning again now.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone got a chance to stretch their legs, grab a snack, grab some coffee. We have another great back half of the program for you, and we're going to start off with a very special guest. She's the CEO of Siemens US, and earlier this morning we were talking about how do business leaders think about allocating capital. That is certainly something that is right in her purview, given all of this instability we talked about earlier this morning. So I want to bring up on the stage Anne Fairchild. She's the CEO of Siemens US. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Great to have you. And we were just talking about how you're based here in DC. So this is a nice short hop here.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. And I think this is such a beautiful venue. And it's an honor to be with you today.
Well, thank you for joining us. And you know, I know that Siemens recently reached a milestone here in the U.S., investing $1 billion in domestic manufacturing over the past 5 years. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about, bouncing off of that milestone, how you think about allocating capital going forward. Because earlier this morning, we had several Congress people on talking about, we had Peter Navarro on as well, talking about tariffs, and also border protections and tax policies. That's a lot for a CEO to handle these days. So I'm curious how you're thinking about allocating capital going forward, given this environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenging environment for sure, but I think we've really reached a significant milestone for Siemens. And when we look at where we are in the U.S. market, Siemens is a very large, multinational global company, but the United States is our largest market. We have over 50,000 employees here in the United States, 25 manufacturing sites, over 16,000 suppliers across the United States. And for us to see more investment coming our way in the U.S., it's a wonderful opportunity. We've always embraced the local for local to help strengthen our relationship with our customers and to serve the industries that are really the backbone of the American economy. The milestone that you referenced is something we're very proud of. Over the last 5 years, we've invested $1 billion in new U.S. manufacturing, and those sites span across the United States. And we're very excited about that investment. It's really helped us to strengthen our local manufacturing footprint, but it helps us to really think through what are the benefits for our customers, for our employees, for the communities in which we live and serve. And it's been a fantastic journey, one that we're very proud of.
Right, and alongside that investment is also, I know Siemens is investing in reskilling or upskilling workers as well. And so I wanted to get your take because there's lots of conversation about, do we have the workforce in place for, for industries going forward? And I want to get your take on, do we have the skill set for the factory floor?
That's right. The investment alone equals over 2,000 jobs that we've created, connected directly to those sites. But what we're witnessing is something that you've referenced, Betty, which is this gap in the workforce, right? I mean, when we speak to our customers, we all have the same challenge, and this is not a new challenge, but it's one that we believe will increase if we don't tackle it head on, and that is a shortage of skilled workers, electricians, experts in manufacturing. There are approximately 400,000 unfilled jobs in that space here today in the United States, and we expect that number to increase, not decrease, unless we're proactive about addressing that challenge. And Siemens has committed, we announced last year, we've committed to training over 200,000 future electricians and manufacturing experts in the United States by 2030. Obviously, that's much larger than our own workforce, right? And so, but we do believe that this is an entire ecosystem challenge that we need to work together with our customers, with competition, with government, with industry, with academia to really tackle workforce development challenges.
Yeah, because there's so much discussion about workforce development and jobs given AI, and and when I say AI, I mean that covers so many different areas.
Yes.
But when we have heard about AI so far, it's been about job loss and replacing workers. How are you thinking about AI? And let's start first with the retraining or the training of the workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a hot topic. I mean, the joke is you can't have any conversation about anything anymore without bringing AI into the conversation. It's very relevant. Siemens, I mean, we believe that industrial AI is the game changer, helping our customers to connect the virtual world with the real world and being able to deploy AI in real world applications. That's important for us and important for the workforce of the future, to link it back to the job development conversation, for future and existing people in the workforce to really understand how to deploy those AI tools to be able to translate. There is certainly this discussion about, I think there's a narrative around AI, one that we need to counter, right? That there can be displacement of workforce, but we believe that more jobs will be created than eliminated throughout this AI journey. And to train the workforce, our current workforce inside Siemens, as well as with our customers and our partners right now, to be able to adopt AI and to use it in their daily work for their own personal, I think, efficiencies. We could talk about that all day, what we are doing in AI space personally, but in the professional space, being able to use AI tools to become more efficient and to help our customers also further their journey in the adoption of AI. We see customers really embracing so much, and I think we're at a tipping point where we're really seeing the adoption rate increase exponentially, and doing it in a smart and careful way when you talk about industrial AI, to ensure that we put the right guardrails in place so that the use of AI in the industrial space really can yield the productivity and the efficiency gains that our customers are looking for.
Yeah, can we dig a little bit deeper in that? Because I'm curious how you are able to measure the results or measure the success of AI, because I think that's something that business leaders from the very big companies to startups are wrestling with, is how do you measure the success of deploying that intelligence?
I agree. I think it's a challenge that people struggle to really understand, translate, and then be able to build into their own discussions with their employees or their constituents if they're in the political arena. I think real stories really help convey that. And a real story that we like to share is one from a company that you all probably know, PepsiCo. So PepsiCo adopted our digital software tools over the last 2 years to really help optimize their production facilities. And I heard the head of the operations share the story personally on Monday afternoon, talking to a huge group of fellow sort of customers and Siemens constituents, talking about how they were looking at merging existing facilities that were, I don't want to say outdated, but had not been updated in many, many years. But how would they upgrade their facilities and be able to come together with a combined distribution facility going forward? And Siemens said, look, we can create the digital twin of your existing operations, of the brownfield operations. We can create a digital twin of the entire process across multiple facilities, and we can do that within 12 weeks. And
12 weeks.
PepsiCo said, okay, game on, let's do it. And so Siemens met the challenge, and we created the digital twin of their entire production facility across multiple operations, so that they were able to then simulate in the virtual world various upgrades, enhancements, process flows, distribution changes. What would they need to make, what would they need to invest to really make the efficiency gains that they were looking for? And they did all of that in the virtual world before deploying the first actual physical change in their facilities. Once they optimized in the virtual world, they could deploy that in the real world. And the gain, they've said it's at least 20% gain in efficiency and throughput from those two facilities that they were able to modernize through the use of our digital twin software using AI. And I think bringing AI into the backbone, into the infrastructure of existing facilities and certainly new facilities, but you can do both. And I think sharing more of those stories helps our customers to really understand what the tangible benefits are.
What do you estimate, without industrial AI or being leveraged here? What do you think that would have actually looked like for PepsiCo?
You know, years maybe,
Really?
or at least, you know, we think at least a year to be able to replicate, and probably a lot of, you know, misallocated spend, right, or wasted effort as you're trying to make revisions along the way. And then testing it in the real world and something's not right, and then you have to redeploy those resources in a different way. And so it's much more efficient to be able to do it in the virtual world first. And in talking with government stakeholders, with policymakers, and with our customers, we really encourage a digital first mindset, right? And if you think about the capabilities of AI, it is astounding for all of us to see how fast this technology is evolving. But to be able to think in a digital first way, plan everything in the simulated environment first before you start, you know, before shovel in the ground, before you're really investing dollars to start moving things around in a brownfield facility. I think the opportunities are truly endless.
Some of the conversation this morning was also about how, you know, countries that we were once friends with or that we, you know, did not have issues with now, you know, Canada, Mexico, or whoever, you know, now we're in intense trade negotiations with them or retaliating, you know, against some of their policies. So, you know, no secret, Siemens is a part of a larger German company, you know, headquartered in Germany. And I know you're on the German-American Business Council. You're a board member there. So I'm curious how you wear both hats, right? And what you advocate for, because you're, you know, clearly investing in the US, you're a huge US employer, and you also have a parent company in Germany, and our relationship with Europe has been pretty rocky over the last, you know, 12 months or so, or longer. So how do you navigate? I'm curious, you know, as you are wearing both hats, what are you advocating for?
You know, transatlantic relations is so important to us, and I'm sure to all of you watching this conversation. I mean, for us, it's important that dialogues continue and that we have open and fair trade across, and to be able to find the right balance between policy that is in the national interest, but also, you know, doesn't hinder innovation across borders. We can't do it alone, right? And so being able to share best practices between our German headquarters and the United States is something that we continue to do, and to learn from our experiences around the world. Siemens is a global powerhouse for sure, but it does help that we have a very strong presence here in the United States. And so we like to think of ourselves, you know, as truly an American company with our strong relationship with our parent in Germany. But we invest here, we employ here, we train and educate here. That commitment to the workforce that I mentioned, there's many throngs to that we continue to deploy across the 50 states where we operate. And that helps us in conversations with stakeholders here in the United States. They certainly see us as the powerhouse that we are, but with the German ingenuity that we come from, our roots, that continues to flourish, but also really investing locally. And that helps us to navigate those conversations.
And Anne, just as a last question here as we're wrapping up, you were made permanent CEO earlier this year, so congratulations. And you have a more unusual path in having been general counsel and rising to the very top spot through that pathway. And I'm interested to hear, you know, you spend so much time managing risk, you know, as a GC, and then you rise to the CEO position. What has that been like, and sort of what do you take from your prior roles and purview into the CEO position?
And thank you for the question. 27 years with this company, and 26 of which were in legal and compliance. And so this is a new role for me, but I have really loved stepping up into this role. I think the background and the depth of experience that I've had within this company and advising, I mean, risk mitigation is one of the top priorities of a legal and compliance organization. And so that helps, right? But I have to say and I'm very biased when I say this, but the way that our legal and compliance organization has evolved over the last, 2 decades, we're not the Department of No, right? We're the Department of Yes. How do we do that, right? How do we get to yes? How do we mitigate risk, but also find the opportunities, and being very, very close to the business, right, as a partner throughout the process. And I think that training and education had really helped me to step up into this role to say, this is great. It's fun to say, okay, legal will handle that now. But also, I think to bring, the legal team that we have is just, I think, world class. And it's been a fantastic foundation to start this next chapter.
Fantastic. And one final question, I like to ask CEOs this all the time, because I know you're thinking about it. What is keeping you up at night these days? aside from your kids, everyone always says their kids.
Exactly. But what keeps you up at night? I mean, the speed, the scale, right? I mean, can we do it? Can we match it, right? Can we really capture the full opportunity that's out there right now? It's a very exciting moment with all of the topics we discussed, with AI, with innovation, and I believe we're moving at super high speeds. But is it fast enough? I think that's the conversation that we ask ourselves every day.
Not missing the boat.
Not missing any opportunity, being able to maintain this momentum.
Anne, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank
Anne
you.
Fairchild, CEO of Siemens US.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You can exit. Oh, that way's good too. I wanted to just quickly introduce or bring up for our next panel, the Hill's White House reporter, Julia Manchester. She's going to be interviewing Kelly Loeffler, the Small Business Administration administrator. So Julia, Kelly, come on up.
Thank you, Betty, for the introduction, and thank you all for coming here today and watching our summit. And Administrator, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
You know, obviously the economy, I think, and Peter Navarro talked about this in his segment earlier, the economy is in an interesting place right now. We're seeing gas prices are high, inflation's high. How are small businesses right now coping with this, and how is SBA helping them cope with this?
Well, thank you for having me. Excited to be here. I travel across the country every single week, meeting with small businesses. Last week I was out in Arizona and New Mexico. Later this week I'll be in Ohio and Michigan. That's the best source of truth for me. Certainly there's a lot of economic data. I think one of the strongest indicators, or two of the strongest indicators of the health of small business is to look at what they're doing. They're forming at record levels across this country. We've never had business formation at the levels it is today. Over 500,000 a month in the last couple months. Year to date, record business formation. So you see that confidence in this economy, and that's driven by things like deregulation and tax cuts and reshoring and fair trade. The other one is hiring. So in the last 2 months, this economy has created, in 2 months, 313,000 private sector jobs. So nothing says confidence like bringing on that worker and training them. And we know that small businesses create about 80% of all new jobs in this country. So they are our job creation engine. I don't know about you, but you probably got your first job at a small business. Yeah. Most of us did. We got trained that way. So the fundamentals of the economy, gas prices notwithstanding, which, I checked the forward pricing curve for oil futures, gasoline futures. They are forecast to come down this year. This is a moment in which small businesses rise to the challenge. Small businesses deal with greater uncertainty than big businesses, and they manage through it from year to year, and they look long term. And now they can because of the working family tax cuts, making sure that they have certainty on their tax rates and making them more confident to invest in the future with 100% expensing and things that are really rocket fuel for their growth.
You mentioned you've been traveling to meet with small business owners in states across the country. Talk about some of the support that the administration is offering small businesses right now during these very uncertain economic times.
Well, the biggest thing we can do for small business is get the government out of the way, and that's making sure that tax cuts didn't rise by taxes didn't rise by $4 trillion that were forecast if the JCTA expired at the end of last year. It's things like taking a bite out of the $5 trillion of regulation that was passed under the Biden administration. One of the biggest things I hear from small businesses, regulation is, and it's not just federal, it's state and local. And so they want that to happen. And the biggest thing I can control is making sure that there's an SBA there that works for small business. And that's why we have really refocused the mission of the Small Business Administration back to serving Main Street businesses, getting our loan programs back in order, strengthening our ability to serve manufacturers in this country, most of which are small businesses, and then ensuring that our staff is solely focused on delivering results. And that's been a big turnaround for the SBA, where in the prior administration, the lending guidelines went way off the rails, cost taxpayers $2 billion in loan losses. We need to have a performing portfolio so that that program is there for that next small business.
You mentioned regulation and getting government out of the way. We know that there are some states that would very much be on board with that, others that may take a different view. What is that relationship like with working with sort of a patchwork of states and how they're approaching regulation when it comes to business, in particular small business?
Yeah, I certainly see it. And I travel the country, from New York to Maine to Alaska, California. I mentioned I was in New Mexico and Arizona. And so I get to see the diversity of approaches to regulation, especially state and local, because while we talk to them about federal regulations, and one of my favorite that I've worked with EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin and USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins on is diesel exhaust fluid. Talk about people who have been hit hard by these regulations. It's farmers, truckers, ranchers, construction folks that every time they face a repair, it's thousands of dollars for a single repair. So I love getting to talk about that. But the states definitely take a very impactful approach, and those that are taking a heavy-handed approach to regulation are losing businesses. And we see that in Minnesota where small businesses have fled. We see it in California, New York. I was talking to a small business in New York who the city came in, made them buy new lighting fixtures. When they installed the lighting fixtures, the city came in and said, we don't like how they're hung. You need to have them hung in a different manner. It's just too much for some small businesses, particularly that already live in a high tax area. So you layer on regulation, that's another tax. And that's why they're leaving some of the states that are too heavy-handed there.
I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about tariffs. I know that President Trump has adjusted some tariffs yesterday, some steel and aluminum tariffs. How have the tariffs impacted small businesses over the past 2 years, or 1.5 years, I should say?
Yeah, look, this is something the president has talked about for decades. If you remember, he ran ads in the papers back in the 80s talking about America getting ripped off and laughed at. And American strength is coming back because his belief in the American worker and the American industry. And so what we have seen is bringing the $18 trillion of capital flowing back into this country to rebuild our manufacturing base is actually working. And I spend a lot of time walking factory floors. One in particular stands out, Coosa Steel in Georgia. In Rome, Georgia was down to one shift, 2 days a week. And they said the tariffs have been transformative. They're now up to 2 shifts, 5 days a week, and they're thinking about adding a 3rd shift. This is a story that is repeated state after state, and I see it. And the demand, not just for the work, but for the workers is rising. And that's what's so important to this nation, is that we become a nation of builders and workers again, and that's what's happening. You see it in the jobs data, you see it in the PMI data. We just reported our 5th month of expansion in the ISM PMI, which is one of the few leading economic indicators that we have that looks forward and not in the rearview mirror. And that expansion is happening in real time. For the first quarter in 4 years, we created a net gain in manufacturing jobs. And then you have the construction of factory that's happening. And certainly at the SBA, we're responding to that. We've announced that raising our loan limits to $10 million, particularly that would help manufacturers, waiving the fees, things like that, giving a 90% guarantee. And then on Friday, I'll be in Detroit at a manufacturer supplier matchmaking event that matches over 1,000 small businesses with a couple dozen large manufacturers, because those large manufacturers are reshoring our supply chains. This is something I worked on in the Senate in 2020. And so it's so great to be in the executive branch, in the government, to be able to actually do that on the ground.
Do you think, you mentioned your time in the Senate, and we had a bipartisan group of lawmakers here earlier, or small lawmakers here earlier this morning. Do you think there's room when it comes to, I guess there's overlap or bipartisan agreement when it comes to working with small businesses? I mean, have you had conversations with Democrats about this?
Absolutely. There's almost nothing more bipartisan, in my view, than small business. This is for everyone. It affects every single community. It makes up 99% of all businesses in most states in America and creates half the employment in that state. And a lot of people say they love small businesses, but do they really know small businesses? I'm not sure. We have a bill for Made in America Manufacturing Finance Act that we're watching trying to get through the Senate. And it's more funding for building small manufacturers, the hard-working men and women, the welders that want to reshore our supply chain. It's not getting through. So I hope it can be bipartisan. We've certainly had some success in seeing a couple small business things get through. But this is vital to lift up every community to support small business.
I think there's been, you mentioned the manufacturers you've talked with about tariffs and, how they've been supportive of it. We've also seen, I think, some concerns and frustrations from small business employees, larger business employees about the economy under this administration. What is your message to them right now? We're obviously in a political midterm year. We're hearing a lot of messaging, but what would you tell them right now?
Yeah, well, certainly the turnaround from seeing rampant inflation for 4 years that drove up price levels more than 21%, those days are ending. And certainly it takes time to come back from that. But you see it in the form of tax cuts. Now, every single Democrat voted against the working family tax cuts that 60 million Americans benefited from, one of the 4 key no tax on tips, overtime, Social Security, or new automobile purchases. And particularly you think about overtime, 25 million Americans were able to put in more overtime. And small businesses, whose one of their top 3 concerns is there's not enough workers to hire, so they get more work. So between job creation, inflation leveling out, core inflation 2.8% right now, and in a deregulatory environment, it's a very different situation than we faced 4 years when we were faced with an onslaught of Green New Deal regulations that drove up the cost of housing 20%, that really froze our energy dominance in its track. Now we're a net exporter of energy. And so these are the foundations of having a strong industrial base: energy dominance, low taxes, low regulation, and fair trade. And these 4 tent poles are going to build, is what the economy is going to be built on. For the next 250 years, if you think about what we're doing here today, this is the most transformative economic agenda that we have had really in a modern presidency.
I want to talk about maybe a news of the week topic. President Trump signed an AI legislation, looking at regulation into law yesterday. I know that there's a lot of questions in the business community about how AI is going to impact employees, impact their work going forward. How is SBA preparing or helping small businesses navigate the world of AI?
It's a great question. I talk to small businesses about AI in most conversations. And when I ask if they're using it, most say, of course I am, and here's how it's helping me. A few will say, not yet, I'd love to learn more. That's where we'd like to be helpful, particularly since 60% of SBA loans go to businesses with fewer than 6 employees. That said, AI is going to fuel the next round of entrepreneurship. You'll see solopreneurship come up because AI will help efficiently cover some of the functions that maybe you would have needed 2 or 3 people to do. I've built a small business. I know that you need legal help, you need marketing, you need human resources, insurance, expertise. This can help you get off the ground that much faster. It may have a lot to do with what's going on with our business formation now. But I think generally small businesses are very optimistic about it. And I think workers are too. I mean, we've seen at different technology inflection points employment rise. And that's been true since the 1940s, when this country had a workforce of 56 million employees. Through to the dot-com boom, through that, employment rose dramatically. And even to today with 170 million workers employed. So you take it from low compute capacity at 56 million in the 40s to high compute and rising, all-time record employment today. Right. So I think small businesses are optimistic that it's going to bring opportunities and let them compete on a level playing field with the big businesses.
Do you think there's any risks with AI? What would you have any warning to small businesses? Because just to, I guess, assuage some of those concerns.
Well, certainly the biggest risk is the one President Trump's addressing, which is that China becomes dominant in AI. And that is why he has so closely focused on AI being the global leader and being the standard setter in AI, and that's absolutely critical to small businesses so that it can become a functioning tool that they can use. And so, but I do think with any technology, you have to be aware of the risks and think it through. But I think the bigger risk is not being involved in it, using it, testing it. You can always put it in a sandbox test environment. A lot of small businesses I visit that use it are manufacturers. They talk about how it's really created speed in their production planning timelines. It used to take them 2 or 3 or 4 weeks to plan production. Now it takes a day. Right. And when you're a small business, cranking out parts for a major defense manufacturer, that makes all the difference in being able to compete for that contract with some of the bigger manufacturers.
We only have less than a minute left, but I want to make sure we touch on this. You mentioned 250 earlier. Very big year for the U.S. celebrating that anniversary. SBA, I understand, is doing a little pitch competition, I should say, for small businesses. Just give us an overview of that.
Yeah, the Patriot Pitch competition has $1 million in cash prizes available to the small businesses that are the 5 finalists, provided by Clover Payments. I want to thank Clover for supporting it. But importantly, we're celebrating free enterprise that supported this country's rise to the greatest economic superpower in the world and just getting started. The deadline closes a week from today on July 10th. And so on July 4th, we'll announce our top 10 finalists. We want to celebrate those great small businesses that I have the blessing of seeing every day, those that are punching above their weight, contributing to their community, driving jobs and innovation. And we'll have that competition here in Washington in September. So.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Administrator Loeffler, thank you so much for your time. It was so great sitting down with you.
Wonderful to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
That way. Thank you. Well, now it's time for our to look at the tech and investment climate and how AI is affecting investing in America. We welcome to the stage the President General of the Catalyst Institute, Teresa Carlson, in conversation with Betty Liu.
Thank you so much. That was a terrific conversation, and I'm excited to bring on Teresa Carlson onto the stage. She's the founding CEO of General Catalyst Institute, and you're also on the operating committee of General Catalyst, and I've had a stellar career in technology. And I just wanted to bounce off of, or play off of the conversation we just heard from Administrator Loeffler about small businesses and something she said about solopreneurs leveraging AI. And I'm curious to hear your view. Is it before long we're going to start to see solopreneurs creating billion-dollar unicorn companies? Are we not far off from that?
I actually love that she brought this up because we believe that. We believe that AI is going to be, where a lot of people talk about the loss of jobs. We actually believe that individuals who have agency are going to be able to create their jobs through building their own companies. Because how many of you are using Claude Code or some type of code in here? Are you guys using it? Well, you don't need
There's got to be more.
I'm kind of surprised because even I'm doing it. But you don't need like a computer science degree or a PhD degree. It really is quite phenomenal what you can do with the technology today. So I agree with her completely. It's just we're not really talking about that too much. I think everybody's kind of focused on the negative side constantly on AI and just saying, well, okay, it's here. How do we take advantage of it? And how do we make sure individuals across America can take advantage of it?
Yeah, and I want to get deeper into the AI conversation, but I also wanted to, which is adjacent to this, which is something that you've been focused on, national resilience or global resilience companies, deep tech companies, more capital intensive, cybersecurity, defense. This is your area of focus now, so give us a little sense of why investors should be really looking at that, looking at this space.
Well, for one second, I'll back up and say that General Catalyst Institute, we're part of General Catalyst. We're one of the largest venture capital firms in the world. We both invest globally and in these areas that you talk about. So things around global or national resilience, financial services, healthcare, defense, intel, manufacturing, energy. So these are the things that we believe, to your point, are the backbone. And they are now something that's very different. Venture capital has been known more to invest in, it's a longer term to get to the payoff because you invest in companies very early. You can invest in them very early, but you're generally investing it's been a lot of software. But now what's changed is because of artificial intelligence, you need to invest across the entire supply chain. To your point on artificial intelligence, everything from things like critical minerals to building manufacturing plants for things like wire harnessing and welding. So new energy sources like fusion, nuclear. So you're seeing venture capital now almost become more of a blend where they are thinking through, hey, to be successful, you have to invest across that supply chain. And that's really what I believe has changed a lot in the last 5 years.
Yeah, and does that also mean changing the investment horizon on return? This is what I'm thinking about it from the investment perspective. Thinking about changing or altering the investment horizon for exits or for a return, factoring in, because these companies are more capital intensive, are the returns going to be the same? These are going to be some of the questions that I think investors are thinking about as they look across that whole chain.
I think it depends. And the reason I say it depends, on some things yes and some things no, and here's why. I think none of us expected artificial intelligence to move as fast as it's been moving. So as a result of that, the investment payoffs are actually moving up because you need these things a lot. Again, the name of your summit, the Invest in America Summit. Well, in order to do that, things like critical minerals, they're already mining them through a end-to-end supplier that's American, and then the U.S. government's buying those, right? That's actually creating a payoff. Drones, which needs a lot of components, lenses, radar, motors, things that takes a while, right? These are more traditional industries that we have let go a lot of in the U.S. So they're building this up. Manufacturing facilities cost a lot to build, but now we are seeing signals of buying. So when you're investing, as an investor, you have to say, well, we just don't want to invest for investment's sake. You've got to see signals of purchase and buying. And so we've seen massive signals, of course, in the U.S. and also with our allies for things like drones that need these capabilities. And now you're moving that out to the commercial industry, who's going to have to use drone to protect a counterattack, as an example. So that's the reason I say yes and no. Some things like fusion, you got to invest way ahead, but we're going to need fusion. So we are very bullish. We have a company we invested called Pacific Fusion. They're doing great already. I mean, they've gotten the support of the U.S. government and commercial industry. So we're seeing these things just move along a lot faster than we would have before.
So it's kind of a mix.
It's a mix.
Yeah.
It's a mix. Faster than you would have expected it, I guess, as you're seeing the payoff now.
Now, you help bridge Silicon Valley with DC.
Yes.
And I'm curious how the conversations have changed, are changing. What have you noticed? Because you've been working in the public and private sides for many, many years.
You and I kind of talked about this before. In my work with cloud computing, when I was at Amazon and Microsoft, the administrations around new technology moved slowly. They were interested, and they were ARPA and DARPA and the labs. They were creating things, but it was just a bit more slower. Technology timeframes were important, but you just didn't see the movement. Now, fast forward today, I say this in a completely apolitical perspective, but this administration is the most commercial friendly I've ever been part of. I brought up, some people in here may or may not remember Vivek Kundra during the Obama administration. They actually brought in laptops and cell phones into the White House, and that was like a big deal back then. I mean, I remember seeing them, I think I have photos somewhere of them hauling them out, because I was still at Microsoft at the time, and we're like helping them with new laptops and their networking. And that was like such a big deal, but it took a long time. And again, today, the thing that's really changed, and one more point, in my AWS days when I started that business, there was no such thing in 2010 of something called a defense tech or a gov tech. There was really no such category. And so again, fast forward today, look at all the companies that have come into the US government, are getting contracts. And this administration is very open, they're very commercial. They really are listening. And what you said about my institute, what we do, we try to bring the valley to the hill. So we bring our companies here. We actually teach them, train them, work with them, answer their questions, encourage them to work with the US government and governments around the world that we invest in. But when we take our companies in to meet with the White House, with Department of War, to the Capitol Hill, they are so open. And our founders actually can't believe it. They're like, I think they're listening. And I'm like, yeah, they're interested in what you have to say. They don't want to be behind. Kelly brought up China. I think it's another big issue where the administration is like, we have to move faster. We have to open up our acquisition spectrum here and make sure that we are bringing a lot of these startup companies in so we can begin to take advantage. And one area that I brought up earlier, drones. And our US Department of Defense now needs so many drones, the capabilities, I think they said 1 million in the next year. And we do not have the supply chain yet for that. We don't have enough companies. So in order to achieve that and make sure we're not only building them for us, but for our allies, we are gonna have to invest in something than just your traditional defense industrial base.
Right, we have to get creative and
That's right.
also quick. I mean, that's sort of a theme I'm hearing from many of the leaders late in the morning here about, not missing out. And we heard Anne Fairchild say, like, that's what's keeping her up at night, just making sure she's moving fast enough.
It's a sense of urgency, to your point, and it's not a made-up sense of urgency. This is, you all probably saw just in the last 2 days, the fighting kept going in Kuwait and Bahrain and other parts of the Middle East where there was targets and bombings on the airport. People died, and they're saying, hey, we need America's help there too as the allies. So we're responsible for what we're doing, but we're also responsible to help those that we're participating in a war with.
And Teresa, you advise many companies. You're on the boards of several companies, and I know you're constantly bringing founders in to talk to lawmakers and regulators. What have you found has been the most common mistake that they make, and how do you counsel them when they're in these rooms for the first time?
Well, look, I hate to call it mistakes because they're also curious. It's more about learnings, I would say, if that makes sense. I'll put on the positive. What are the learnings? I think one, that we kind of talked about, because they are in Silicon Valley and they're kind of coding and developing, they don't show up in a suit and a tie, so we say, look, and President Trump has been pretty open about this. If you show up here, you need to show up and look professional. So we coach them in terms of how they need to show up professionally if they want to be taken seriously. Like there is sometimes, I think, an expectation, yeah, you're in tech, you're kind of cool, but in this city, as long as I've been here, the expectation is still to show up, and especially if it's your first time here, to be very professional. And then we coach them on how they tell their story differently to a lawmaker than they would tell it to an investor that they're trying to raise money from. And then again, you have a difference in a story. And if you live here, you don't think about this so much, but how you go in and talk to the White House is different than you go in and talk to Department of War, or how you talk to a lawmaker, and even a Republican and a Democrat. And it's a nuance, right? And we tell our companies, your story's important and what you're doing is important. So we want to make sure that we're supporting them and how they tell that story, because they have it's short. It's like getting your punchline across for an investment, but you've got to do it in a way that they hear. And it's been amazing. We have just had such an incredible response across the board from Capitol Hill. The House, the Senate, bipartisan, the White House, the agencies, they are so open and interested in these companies. And like I said, we have companies say, we can't believe they listen to us. We're so excited. And I shared a story with you, Betty. We have one company that the founder had never been to Washington, D.C., did not know anything about government. Evan Beard in Standard Bots, he builds a robotic arm, and he's super impressive, upstate New York. And after his first visit, 2 or 3 in the administration in Capitol Hill said, we'd like to talk to him again, and others. They invited him to testify on the Hill. He has now testified twice on the Hill. He has gotten contracts with the federal government. And he is so blown away. He said, I just didn't think they would listen to me, or my opinion would be important. So this is an example of when Capitol Hill or the White House hears a story that they think is important to America, they bring in these young founders to really tell that story, and they are also trying to learn. So again, it's a very different scenario than it was even 5 years ago.
I want to talk, just in the few minutes that we have, we haven't actually broached this topic with anyone yet, so I would like to get your thoughts on it, because I know it does directly impact Silicon Valley, which is the search for global talent.
Yes.
And you mentioned this administration is one of the most commercial that you've experienced, and yet they do have an immigration policy, that is quite restrictive, and that has restricted high-level or highly skilled talent coming here. It's made it more difficult. So how are you balancing, or what is the dialogue now with companies around, how do we continue to keep the America First policy and be America First and grow our companies, and at the same time ensure that we are, tapping the most highly skilled and most talented workers around the world?
Well, I think it's a balance. We haven't seen that yet to be a huge problem with our companies, because again, they're smaller. As they grow, it becomes a problem, and we do coach them a lot that if they have to use, outside the U.S. talent, they have to also make sure that their employees that they're trying to hire can get a green card, they can get a visa, that they, especially if you're working in U.S. government, you may have to be a U.S. citizen, right? There's some, as we know, in classified circumstances and clearances, you can't even do work in the U.S. government. So in the world that we talk about here in this town, a lot of times they really do have to be a U.S. citizen for a lot of the work. But when they're early and they're developing their technology, we do try to counsel them that, look, if you're looking for talent, you've got to just make sure if you need them in America, that they can actually be in America, especially when it comes to visas, that they can get a renewal, because some are in college or university and they may have to go back home. So it's tricky. I will say, just on another point of this, and I dealt with this myself a lot when I was at Amazon and cloud computing. We actually found the talent, we had to retrain talent when they came out of university. They really were not learning the skills they needed even in cloud computing. So you're seeing a change where I think at the university and below level, a lot of this talent's training themselves. I mean, they're going online, they're learning, they're working back to that young entrepreneur where they're just learning AI skills on their own. So look, universities are going to have to step up. They've got to change curriculum. They've got to be modern in what's happening, and they have to be iterative, because it's not just going to be one and done now. They have to really keep up at where the technology is and where it's going, and not teach the same thing over and over if it's not evolving.
Right. And Teresa, just final question, and it's kind of a two-parter. What are you most optimistic about, and what keeps you up at night?
I am optimistic. I am very optimistic about artificial intelligence in terms of what it's going to be able to do for us. I think about healthcare. I was just talking to one of our founders about precision medicine for cancer the other day. And it is really unbelievable just in our mind what it's done for cancer treatment and cures. And the fact that we're really going to be able to take our DNA, look at it and say, this drug will work, this drug won't, really true precision medicine to cure these, not just stop them, even cure them. And so I'm so optimistic about what AI can actually do. The thing that keeps me up at night is that America is so skeptical about AI right now. And we tell the stories that are the more negative. If you look across, remember Skynet, Arnold Schwarzenegger? I mean, everybody thinks they started with Skynet and AI being negative, and we continue to proliferate a lot of the negativeness about AI and what it's not doing. or the bad of it. And I think that this is an onus on the US government, on the individuals, the companies, the corporations, universities to change this. Like we cannot, because what America thinks and cares about is really important. Every single citizen matters. I'm from rural America, and you're not gonna go to rural America, where I'm from in Kentucky, and train and teach them about AI like you do in this city, which is highly sophisticated, highly educated, the most educated city in the world. And in fact, Anthropic just came out with a survey that says Washington, D.C. is using AI more than any other city in the world. I don't know if you've seen this.
Oh, right, wow.
Yeah, so I mean, we are a highly sophisticated city in our uses of this technology. So we have to be thoughtful about meeting our citizens where they are. Our lawmakers have to get busy understanding and telling the positive story and begin to plan for their city, their counties, their local government. How is AI gonna help support what we're doing, not just take it backwards? So when I worry, those are the things I'm like, how do we make it better? What do we do, you know, Betty, to move this forward and not just continue to proliferate all the negative?
Right, all the downsides
Yes.
of it. Teresa, thank you so much for joining me and for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Great conversation.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. And now I want to bring back on the stage the Hill's economy and business editor, Sylvan Lane, who's going to be joined by the CFTC chairman, Michael Selly. Come on up.
Thank you so much, Betty. And thank you again, everybody, for coming out and everybody watching at home. I'm pleased to be joined by CFTC Chairman Michael Selig. Chairman Selig, thank you so much yourself for joining us today. Obviously, your commission is up to a lot of interesting work, oversees a lot of interesting parts of the financial system, but I think one of the most interesting and controversial ones is the prediction market universe. We've seen platforms like Kalshi and Polymarket really become bigger, more prominent parts of the investing in online finance space. And I know one of your big focuses at the CFTC is making sure that your commission is the one setting the rules of the country for this. Can you talk to me a little bit about, first and foremost, what these prediction market platforms offer in terms of promise to average American citizens?
Absolutely. The prediction markets are a really exciting and new piece of our derivatives markets. And they're not super new, as they've been around since the 90s, but they've really become more prominent in the past several years. And part of that actually was as a result of some litigation. So under the prior administration, Kalshi, one of the participants you mentioned, sued the CFTC, my agency, under the Biden administration, and won in a lawsuit to have the ability to offer political prediction market contracts on a registered exchange. And in the 90s, we saw these contracts on exchanges where they were focused on nonprofit academic endeavors, very low amounts. I think you could bet maybe a couple $100s, but these types of derivatives contracts have been around for a really long time. And even if you go back to the turn of the century, betting markets, the kind of these bucket shops where people were placing money with a bookie to predict the outcome of different types of events, like political events, have been around for a long time. Regulated markets are important. The CFTC's role is to promote responsible innovation, also to promote fair competition. And we are a markets regulator. So prediction markets, as the name suggests, do allow for people to predict all sorts of outcomes, whether it's politics, sports, and that data is very valuable, right? So that data is being used by news media, by sports media sources, by actual analysts throughout the world, as well as the markets themselves. So a lot of price indicators from the prediction markets are then used to develop trading strategies or to price certain different types of indices and assets. So I think this is very valuable for society. It also is a check on the mainstream media. We saw, for example, at the polling in the 2024 election, Kamala Harris in a landslide per the Iowa polling. But in fact, the prediction markets were spot on. It was a landslide for President Trump. And so it's important to have these checks. I think it's a valuable thing when people place money and put money at risk. They're going to have that kind of almost spam filter, if people are placing money in their prediction as opposed to who's answering the polls, who's actually providing information for a news story. So that's a valuable aspect of it. But I think what's really important is that these are markets, as the name suggests, right? So you've got the prediction piece, you've also got the markets piece, and they have an order book, they have a clearinghouse, they have market rules and requirements. The contracts that are listed can't be readily susceptible to manipulation. We, as a markets regulator, enforce against insider trading, fraud, which I'm happy to get into as well. We've got a number of cases in the courts and pending. So it's really important to have that integrity, have that market protection. When you go to a casino or a sports book, you can place a bet for entertainment, but you don't have the markets piece, so you can't rely on that information that's generated, and you also can't rely on the fact that you're getting a fair price.
Certainly, and to your point, a lot of the focus and energy around prediction markets has been in the realm of sports. I know the CFTC has been involved in some partnerships with some, with at least the MLB, but with that in mind, there have been a few states, Utah comes to mind, that have taken action to ban or limit or regulate prediction markets in their own state. In the case of Utah, as you well know, Governor Cox made it clear that he felt that prediction markets, particularly the sports side of it, fit more in the bucket of traditional sports books, and in Utah, betting is banned in their constitution. I understand there's active litigation that you might not be able to comment on, but on a broader level, why is it not desirable for states like Utah to just be able to be like, look, this is new, we're not sure about it, let's put these rules on right now because we feel like this fits the needs of our states and our citizens?
At the turn of the century, we saw betting in grain as a national pastime, and we had these bucket shops at the street corner where you could place money with a bookie to bet on the price of corn or wheat or whatever else. And then we saw regulated futures exchanges crop up. Initially, this was with the state regulation of various exchanges. For example, in the state of Illinois, we had the Chicago exchanges that are still around today crop up. And then we got a federal regime in the 30s for futures markets, for derivatives markets, and that has grown and expanded over the years. The CFTC was formed, my agency, in the 70s to oversee these markets under a federal regulatory scheme. The definitions in our statute are very broad. So the term commodity, you might think grain, wheat, corn, agricultural products, but in fact, we have all sorts of financial products, all sorts of commodities, things like metals. We've also got prediction markets, so event contracts, as they're called. These types of events, whether it's an event on sports or politics or really anything else, culture, our statute only excludes from that definition of commodity onions and motion picture box office receipts. So it's very limited in terms of what's excluded. We are a regulator that is designed to oversee these comprehensively, exclusively, and our statute's very clear about that. So when states develop these gaming regimes, that works really well for the bookies, for the sports books, for the casinos, but they don't have market regulation. That's not what was intended here. If you go to our statute, there's a findings and purpose clause that's very clear. We, under the Commerce Clause, are supposed to oversee these because there's a national market for these various products in their futures and in swaps and in other types of derivatives. And so we will continue to enforce that. You mentioned various states that have tried to apply their gambling laws. We saw the Third Circuit shut that down. We expect to see other courts shut that down because the text of the statute is very clear and we're operating in the black letter law.
Certainly, and when it comes to the way that your commission wants to take a look at prediction markets too, has there been any talk or consideration about markets that maybe shouldn't exist? Things that maybe it's not appropriate for people to be betting money on, whether, there was discussion around that regarding some of the bets made regarding the military operation in Venezuela. There's been concerns about so-called death markets. Is there basically, are there any markets, or is there a market that the CFTC might look at and be like, yeah, maybe this shouldn't exist?
Our statute provides the agency with the authority to, in its discretion, prohibit trading in contracts involving war, terrorism, assassination, and gaming, which is an undefined term. So we have that discretion, right? We have not allowed a single contract on any U.S. exchange involving war, terrorism, or assassination. We do not comprehensively regulate foreign exchanges. So just like we don't regulate food safety standards in Mexico, we don't go into the European Union and tell exchanges they can't offer certain contracts, but they're not they're not permitted to offer those into the United States. we do enforce that, and we've been a cop on the beat there. You mentioned the military operation that occurred on an offshore exchange, involved a U.S. person, and we've taken action there, and we'll continue to do so.
Certainly, and looking a little bit beyond the prediction market sphere, obviously the CFTC has a lot on its plate, but you're currently the only confirmed commissioner. Has that been a challenge for you at all, whether in terms of just logistically getting stuff done, or maybe being, having a little bit more fun, or having more people around the office to bounce ideas off of?
We've got a excellent, dedicated career staff at the agency. I work with many of the staff on a day-to-day basis. We have a number of divisions that all perform really important functions. Of course, the president is the one who nominates other commissioners, and so we'd welcome the opportunity to work with other commissioners if and when the president chooses to appoint further commissioners.
But logistically, has it come up or been an issue for you at all? Has it been limited the kind of stuff that you wanted to do in the beginning of your term?
The function of the agency, in terms of the commissioner side of things, that really is the kind of more political side, where you can have some discussions with different peers and consider what you're going to vote on. The actual function day-to-day of the agency, that's completely unaffected by that, right? As I mentioned, I'm able to oversee the commission just fine, but to the extent we have additional commissioners, that's something we'd welcome, and we'd be happy to work with other commissioners if the president chooses to nominate further commissioners.
And speaking of the president, it was notable to me that he weighed in on the broader prediction markets discussion, simply because you don't typically get the president or any president weighing in on commodity regulation quite like that. What do you think it's meant to have President Trump so squarely behind this initiative? And furthermore, do you ever communicate with the president about broader policy matters or the ways that you might be kind of shaping these rules around prediction markets?
Well, the president understands, as do I, that these markets are very important. The United States has always been the leading financial market. We're the envy of the world when it comes to financial markets, and we want to keep it that way. So both the president and I understand that that's a critical thing. The president, to your point, recently spoke out about this exclusive authority of the CFTC, and my concern with respect to that, and I believe the president shares this view, is that if we allow for the United States to slip in terms of the ability to regulate its markets, foreign markets will outcompete us. The states will create an edge, and we're going to have competition within the country with respect to our markets. And so maintaining that federal regulatory scheme, as our statute is designed to facilitate, is critically important, and I will continue to ensure that the agency oversees these markets comprehensively. You've mentioned a number of the incidents of insider trading that we've gone to police. If we don't have the authority to regulate these markets, who's going to do that work? I really find it hard to believe that the state of Nevada or Utah is going to go and regulate, a Maduro contract that's trading offshore. So it's very important that we're the federal regulator for these markets, and we keep it that way.
And in terms of the commission's ability to pursue the kinds of insider trading cases that you've been talking about, has there been any consideration to some sort of federal rules on who's allowed to participate in these markets? I know some prediction market platforms have imposed their own internal rules about which types of people can bet in which types of markets, mainly geared toward avoiding issues where members of Congress or staffers might be trading on something that they have advanced knowledge about. But has there been any consideration into the CFTC issuing regulations saying, hey, if you are a member of if you're a member of a sports team, you're not allowed to touch sports prediction markets from a federal level, not just an exchange level?
From a federal level, we're certainly looking at insider trading comprehensively. The insider trading doctrine under the CFTC is very similar to the SEC doctrine, just because it's developed through case law. Both the securities laws and the commodities laws prohibit manipulation and fraud in our markets, and that's been construed to include insider trading. So when somebody misappropriates non-public information where they have a duty, whether it's to their employer or their patient or their client or whoever else, and they use that information, they misappropriate that information and trade on it, that's illegal. We also have authority under our statute to prohibit, and police rather, conduct involving the misappropriation of government information, so government reports. This is actually called the Eddie Murphy rule, named after the Trading Places movie where Eddie Murphy steals a government crop report and trades on it. So that all is illegal. We will continue to police that. We also work together with other agencies throughout the government to make sure that they're informing their employees about this requirement. We will continue to bring enforcement actions where necessary.
And when it comes to the insider trading and the issue of non-public information, in the issue of, stock markets or even certain commodity markets, there are pretty clear rules about, top-level executives and the kinds of things they know. But the interesting thing about prediction markets is that the number of markets are so much wider, and therefore the number of people who may have inside information that may not be transmitted through a normal, corporate structure or, things that might be part of a broader business scheme. I'm thinking specifically about the recent incident of former Congressman George Santos reportedly betting against his own attendance at the State of the Union and potentially making some money off of that. Things like that, how does that change the notion of inside information at all? And does that make it harder for the CFTC to determine whether it's through an enforcement action or in terms of what you're looking at, what specifically might constitute something that would be equivalent to insider trading in a different realm, whether with securities or other things like that?
The insider trading doctrine is very flexible and broad. It allows us to bring enforcement actions against anybody who misappropriates non-public information where they have a duty of confidence to their employer, their client, their patient, whoever else. And that is extraordinarily broad, right? I could have somebody who, in the context you bring up, in the political world, I'm not going to speak to any particular investigation or potential investigation, but a campaign manager who knows information about a candidate, they might trade on that information. They have a duty to their employer, the candidate, or the organization that the candidate's involved with, and they're not able to trade on that because they're violating that duty of confidence. If they do, we will find them and we will take action. And we communicate regularly with the exchanges. You mentioned Kalshi earlier, Polymarket. Many of these are registered with us. Some of them are offshore, but we still are able to get information where it touches the United States, and we will bring action. We are taking a zero tolerance approach to any of this conduct. No matter how small or large, we will take action.
Well, Chairman Seelig, that's unfortunately all the time we have, but thank you so much for joining us today. This was a really interesting conversation.
Great. Thank you.
Now, my final guest is counsel to the chairman of the SEC and senior advisor of the Crypto Task Force at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Please welcome Landon Zinda.
Hi. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So, Landon, you've spent a long time working in crypto policy in DC, and it has changed a lot since the early days of, I remember my editor asking me to write stories about Bitcoin hitting 10,000 and what that meant for the future of crypto. Over the course of your time in DC, can you talk to me just about how much not only the narrative, but the regulations around crypto have changed?
Yeah, so I'm the last person sitting between you and lunch, so I'll be brief. And I work at the Securities and Exchange Commission, so I have to start with a little disclaimer, which is I'm a staffer on the Crypto Task Force. I don't represent the commission. When all three commissioners vote and propose to take an action, that is the commission speaking, and so I'm just here as a staffer of the Crypto Task Force. But yeah, I have worked on crypto policy for close to a decade now. It was an issue that nobody was really paying attention to. I kind of found some interest in it because it was simply just computers connecting to each other and communicating with each other, and the potential for that to be something like the next internet or a network of people freely exchanging value was very interesting and unlike a lot of other financial services issues. So back then it was going in to meet with staffers, going in to meet with members, trying to educate them. I think it still is to some extent. There's a lot of complexity when it comes to crypto. But the rules have remained pretty flexible, and I don't think there's been too much in terms of legislative changes except for the Genius Act, but they're, the laws already contemplated value, money, transmission, so crypto has found its way into that, that mixture of laws and regulations.
Certainly, and one of the more interesting, there's obviously been a lot of changes in between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, but one of the biggest ones that we've seen from our perspective on the business and tech side of things is the shift in approach to the cryptocurrency industry at the SEC. Can you talk to me a little bit about the way that the commission, or at least the crypto task force, has been approaching cryptocurrency regulation, and how that might differ from the way it was done prior to you being there and running the show?
Yeah, so the crypto task force is about a dozen staff throughout the commission, from different commissioners' offices, from enforcement, from all the different divisions. Myself and actually Chairman Seelig were the only two people that were brought in to be on the task force that were not in the commission when the task force started. We've since hired another chief counsel, Taylor Lindman. But the goal of the task force was really to catch up with regulation, how other agencies had incorporated crypto, figured out how to deal with it. The commission had kind of just blocked off any sort of action, pursued enforcement actions, but never really articulated kind of how you would come in and register, what needs to come in and register, what is a security, what is not a security. And so the goal of the task force was to catch up, try to provide some clarity as to different things in crypto, when they are securities, when they're not. And it goes beyond crypto, I'd say at this point, into tokenized securities. If you were to put a stock on Ethereum and trade it on a decentralized exchange, what are the rules there? How does that work? And that's some of the work that the task force is working on now.
Certainly, and speaking of the legislative changes that have been occurring, we've finally got the first big crypto regulation bill signed into law earlier this year in the form of the Genius Act. Can you tell me a little bit about what the commission has been doing to help, kind of prepare for implementing that, and how significant that's going to be in terms of creating the regulatory clarity for crypto that folks have been talking about for almost a decade, if not longer now?
For both Genius Act and Clarity?
Yeah, let's, well, I accidentally brought up the Clarity Act, didn't I? But speaking of clarity, there's another, the Senate bill, the Clarity Act, that is currently in the works, trying to get through the Senate. The broader landscape of crypto regulation, both that's been enacted and on down the pipe. How are you looking toward, implementing that? And what do you think the impact is going to be on the broader crypto industry?
Yeah, you mentioned my history with crypto. I worked in the House for Congressman Tom Emmer for 6 years, worked at the Senate Banking Committee, went off the Hill for about 2 years to work at Coin Center, and then came back to government at the SEC with the task force. And all that time, I was trying to accomplish good crypto policy, like things that made sense. And the Genius Act becoming law is absolutely the biggest policy development in crypto ever. And that was a result of it being nonpartisan. Like, these things, stablecoins being out there traded, run by essentially a company, what rules and regulations should be around that? That's something Republicans and Democrats can come together and say, yeah, there should be some type of regulation around that. The task force, before Genius Act became law, put out the Division of Corporation Finance at the SEC put out a statement saying, generally, stablecoins aren't securities. You're not expecting to make a bunch of money investing in stablecoins. So we had already kind of taken that position. The Genius Act says in law that stablecoins aren't securities, and so a lot of it is pushed outside of the SEC. But there are a lot of rules around, when you trade stocks, how does it work when you trade stocks for USDC or some other stablecoin? There are rules and regulations that we are working on, along with a bunch of other agencies, to implement the Genius Act, and so that's a very complex effort. The Clarity Act has also been 6 to 8 years, if not longer, effort to try to get across the finish line. It also needs to be nonpartisan, and we support it. The commissioners support it, would like to see it get across the finish line. We're eager to implement it. At the same time, I think we do have a lot of exemptive authority to try to tailor our rules towards new technologies, and we have a bunch of registrants from broker-dealers to exchanges, to issuers, to transfer agents, to clearing agencies. This technology allows for the disintermediation of some of those things. So how should our rules appropriately work when maybe you don't need a broker, or you don't need someone else in between you trading your own stock?
And with all of that kind of on the back burner, you mentioned that a lot of the laws that have been passed so far, because they pertain to stablecoins, are more in the wheelhouse of the CFTC, which, as we just spoke with Chairman Seelig and you mentioned, he had, experience with you on the crypto task force. When it comes to figuring out how to manage this new regulatory regime, and specifically with the Clarity Act, the efforts to delineate which regulatory agency is responsible for overseeing which part of the crypto system, is it a benefit to have somebody over at the other agency that is, knowledgeable about this stuff? And can you tell me a little bit about how you two have been working together, or the agencies have been working together broadly to try to get this stuff implemented and cleared up?
Yeah, it definitely helps to have had a relationship previously prior to the chairman becoming the chairman. He worked with Commissioner Peirce, who's the head of the crypto task force, extensively, and so they have that relationship. He was also in the chairman's office, Chairman Atkins, so he had that relationship as well. And the agencies don't have the greatest history of working together, but in crypto they really have to, and it has been one of the best. There's an initiative called the Harmonization Initiative, which is an initiative between both agencies to try to figure out if how our rules interact. If a registrant is regulated by one, can you have uniform things when they trade futures versus when they trade stocks? And so that has been very beneficial. And the Clarity Act also contemplates something potentially starting out as a security, having to have disclosures, and there being a handoff from the SEC to the CFTC when that thing is a commodity and it trades like every other commodity.
Now, you mentioned Commissioner Peirce. She is set to leave the SEC sometime this year because of the end of her term. And you mentioned that she was the head of the crypto task force. She obviously was a pretty key player in kind of raising, or laying the groundwork for the SEC's regulatory efforts and raising the profile of crypto regulation in DC to the extent that she did. Can you talk to me a little bit about what her departure would mean to the SEC's efforts and maybe the legacy that she's kind of left behind for you to take up?
Yeah, she's been foundational to crypto policy since the beginning. I don't think people realize how much of a change it would be if when someone like that leaves their post. There's never been someone more influential in crypto policy leave their post. So it'll be a big deal. She's done a lot of tremendous work. She's the reason I work on the task force. But I will say, I was also very pleasantly surprised how much Chairman Atkins was interested in the topic when he came in. I didn't know too much at the time, and he came in and was actively interested and wanted to be involved in all the details. So I think the commission will be in a good place with the chairman actually interested in working on these topics.
Now, obviously there's also the issue of a potential loss of quorum if, somebody doesn't come in and said, I know obviously that's up to the president to nominate someone in the Senate to confirm them, but what would the SEC be able to do as we wrap up if there's a period of time where you only have 2 commissioners and the broader ability to, approve new regulations might be limited?
It's a good question. I came into the commission last year, so I'm not super familiar. I know the chairman has talked about instances in the past where the commission has been less than full, being able to operate pretty easily. And so my understanding is that even with the 2 remaining commissioners, there would be ability to operate. So I leave that up to the commissioners and the president.
Certainly. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
All right, well, we've come to the end of our program. Thank you to Sylvan and to Julia for hosting the conversations today. Thank you to Tokyo Electron for sponsoring this event. And most of all, thank you to all of you for joining us this morning. I hope you found the conversations to be very useful for your own roles. And don't forget to grab lunch on your way out. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thank you.